It all begins on a very dark night in a building where a conversation is heard. Inside the building, two people are sitting in front of each other with cups of tea until the one in yellow laments. He had waited decades for his friend, and now, being very cold, he would only drink a cup of the beverage. Ryanja fills the cup of his dear companion. The two were very young when they first met. The old man stares silently at his friend for a few seconds, also being stared at by the man with a scar on his face. As the tea pours slowly into his cup, he thinks that it has been 40 years since he met that young man. Some time ago, the man entered that place, begging for the great regression technique to be used on him because he wanted to return immediately to the past. The old man then thought about the feat of regressing someone to previous times. They stare at each other for a brief period during that day. That technique is one of the greatest achievements of the Gui family, having been researched for centuries and passed down. That stratagem was nearly impossible to use. The man with tied hair couldn't have completed it, but he had no choice and decided to give up. There were 5 materials needed to complete the technique, and it was impossible to obtain all of them. So he tells the man that if he brings the necessary materials, he will perform the ritual. The Thunderbell, a sacred artifact of the Celestial Wind Cult, a golden incense burner of the divine Celestial Dragon family, the main essence of the 10,000-year-old carp, and the secret demonic soul of the demonic cult. The old man says he thought the young man had died in some unknown place. He is then very perplexed and cannot believe that the man had managed to get all the materials after so many years of being gone. That fierce missionary tells the old man that his technique must be very phenomenal to require so many materials, and that he had considered just killing him. The old man stares at him silently for a few seconds. He then thinks that the young man was very young when he set out in search of the amulets, and that now he was very different and inevitably changed. Finally, he asks why the man wants to go back to the past. Out of nowhere, the man slams the cup on the table with great force, and with a look of anger and rage, he says that the reason was revenge. The old man, shocked and scared, stares at him, and immediately asks about the impossibility of avenging himself with his skills without needing to go back to the past and who this grudge was against. The man with long hair looks at him and replies that it was all because of Holmuji, and then the old man widens his eyes. All the leaders of the 3 strongest groups known as the Pillars of Nurim were killed by this man. The exact trio of commanders was killed, including the celestial demon. Holmuji was the strongest man in history. He was the most powerful person of that era. The old man then says that he cannot defeat Muji even if he goes back to the past, being answered with a well-known reply as that man wanted to kill his enemy at any cost. The celestial demon that his opponent had killed was his father. With this revelation, the old man is shocked and widens his eyes again. However, he was not seeking revenge for the death of his father and his treacherous brother, as those deaths were not uncommon. The gray-haired man then asks why all of this. The answer was that on that day, Mugi had killed servants, cooks, and even children who had not been trained. He had no pity even for the cats and dogs. We couldn't believe it all, but his friend didn't care. In that era, the protagonist would not be able to kill his opponent, so he needed to go back in time and question his enemy before killing him about such brutality. Again, the old man stares at him with nothing to say. Soon after, he then asks if the same man could do him a favor if he succeeded in returning to the past. The old man wanted the protagonist to find him in the past. Confused, he is asked about that decision, and he replies that he wanted to be prevented from getting married. They stare at each other in silence after that. The protagonist looks serious, and then out of nowhere, he bursts into laughter at all of it. The old man's embarrassed and says that he is not joking, as he had to live alone until the end of his life. He is answered affirmatively, and with a promise by the time traveler, who wanted to quickly go to the place where the technique would be used. The two stand up, but the protagonist feels dizzy. He is asked if he is alright and replies that he lost an arm and an eye to obtain the secret demonic soul. Then the Thunderbell is seen, bright blue and shimmering. The old man approaches with a box. He opens it, revealing a black orb that draws a lot of attention. He makes a gesture in front of the monument, which soon reacts powerfully. Everything had already come together and was in perfect harmony, including the master. Still making gestures, suddenly a huge white light appears in front of him. Then a vast and wide portal opens right there. He is impressed and astonished, his eyes wide with a look of great surprise. Still making gestures, he celebrates his accomplishment. He then asks his friend if he saw that because he had always said it would work and that he could open the portal to the past. They stare at each other in silence for a while because the protagonist doesn't seem as enthusiastic about the feat. He sighs, seeming quite nervous and even regretful. The gray-haired man still doesn't understand it all and watches a bit confused. He looks at the portal for a few seconds. He turns to the protagonist again and says he feels sorry. He repeats what he said as he walks toward the portal. He says he promises to find his partner and warn him of the impending disaster. Going back to the past was his family's greatest wish and his as well. Suddenly, he feels something holding him, making him unable to move. He couldn't move, and his demonic acupuncture points had been sealed. The protagonist suddenly appears behind him, asking how he dared to do that. The old man widens his eyes, fear and anguish evident on his face. Of all the people in the world, he dared to betray the protagonist's trust. Suddenly, he is grabbed by the neck, held tightly for being a repulsive traitor. and he groans in pain, his face exuding agony and despair. He says he lost his head for a few minutes, regretting everything. He also says that obtaining all those materials must have been very difficult for the protagonist, and he had no right to betray his trust so blatantly. The man with the scar on his face looks at him with little pity or compassion, and then slowly begins to remove his hand from the old man's neck. Immediately after, he says that he too had been a selfish person, and for that reason, he managed to gather all the amulets he needed while the gray-haired man coughs heavily. He tells the old man that if it had been anyone else in his place, it would have been killed on the spot without mercy. But since it was him, everything was understandable and forgivable. The protagonist brings his hand close to the old man's coat, touches his chest, and thanks him for waiting for him all his life. Ryongja, astonished, widens his tear-filled eyes, while the protagonist looks at him with a face of admiration and pride. He then cries a lot, repentant, saying he is very sorry for doing all that and betraying his trust. His eyes overflow with tears of regret. Suddenly, the protagonist is startled. He slowly and carefully looks around. Some beautiful butterflies are seen resting nearby, and he realizes that time probably stopped. He is very surprised and doesn't understand any of it. A voice suddenly emerges, saying he has passed all the tests. He watches in silence for a few seconds, astonished. Suddenly, a very old person with a long beard and gray hair appears. The protagonist asks who that unknown being is. He is told that this person is the one who can send him back to the past. The old man says there is no way a human can understand the logic of the heavens and asks him if he really believed that a mere mortal could make the journey possible. What was truly needed to complete the technique was not just the materials, but the effort he put into obtaining them all. He had passed the test because he lived his entire life with a single goal in mind and sacrificed everything for it. And his final test was to forgive Ryongja. That was the hardest test of all, but it had been completed easily by him. After so many words from the old man, he responds by asking him to kindly fulfill his wish to be taken back to the distant past, and he is immediately asked what he will do there. He replies that he will kill the one who deserves to die and save the one who should not have died. But that was not his only motivation. He also wanted to live and enjoy his life because he could not do so while always thinking about his enemy. He is then asked what he regrets, and he replies that he regrets everything because his life had never been controlled by his own will but by someone else, and he realized it too late. The old man stares at him for a few seconds. He closes his eyes in a thoughtful and reasoning tone, and soon says that he is very curious about the kind of life the protagonist will live and that he is very eager to see his new life. The beautiful and splendid butterflies unfreeze, and the old man also returns to normal, forgiving himself for his repulsive actions. The protagonist silently observes everything around him coming back to life, and then the gray-haired man continues, reminding him not to forget the promise made earlier, as he truly wished he hadn't married and wanted to be stopped from doing so. Soon the protagonist turns his face towards the giant portal. He tells the old man to stay well, walking slowly towards the hole. The old man even tries to call him back, but he only wanted to remind him to fulfill the promise he made before. The protagonist walks towards the hole very slowly. A white light with golden beams begins to emerge. Then suddenly, he opens his eyes with a desperate expression and sees many people with weapons raised high. He widens his eyes and takes in everything around him. He realizes then that something had truly happened. Considering the fact that he saw all those people gathered together, he had indeed returned to the true past. He looks around again, this time more intently, and he wears a look of admiration as he observes it all. Then he sees several thrones atop a building where many people are seated, and below them, many soldiers are lurking. The person seated on the middle throne had long black hair along with slanted eyes and a wicked expression. His face was quite stern. His eyes were brown, his goatee was very well groomed, exuding an air of superiority over the others. That man would be the beloved and revered father of the protagonist. He looks there with a very attentive gaze. His son then also observes his surroundings carefully, and he is asked how much longer he would keep the others waiting, as well as being addressed as young master. A huge sword in the shape of a knife is strongly planted into the ground. A bizarre man with orange hair gives the command for the fight to finally begin. He and the protagonist stand face to face. The young master finally understands everything. That would be the long-awaited day. It would be there, in that moment, the combat of the new demon. The protagonist's father, who was the celestial demon, had declared that he would not limit the selection of the next leader of the cult to just his own bloodline. Then it caused an uproar within the cult because it meant that anyone could become the celestial demon as long as they were the strongest. But the protagonist's father showed that he was serious about his announcement and soon launched a fighting competition among the next generation leaders of the cult. And the winner of the new demonic skirmish would have the chance to challenge one of the two sons of the celestial demon, and whoever won the fight would have a wish granted by him. The strange man then quickly asked the young master if he was going to give up while there was still time for that. He remained silent with the wind blowing through his hair. The huge scar on his face had disappeared. His skin was younger, including his appearance. At that time, he had been offended by that ugly man choosing him because it meant his opponent thought he was weaker than his brother. But looking back, he might have chosen him for another reason. The ugly man had bribed the cook in his house and asked him to mix energy-dispersing poison into his rice so that he couldn't use his energy. And because of that very dirty trick, he lost the fight. He even tried to tell his father what happened, but he didn't care much and said nothing. In fact, his father looked at him with eyes that seemed to blame him for falling for such a silly and petty trick. After that, the protagonist did some things that pushed him to his limit, and because of his mistakes and failures, he was losing his position in the succession war. It had all started with that defeat on that very day. His opponent soon says that he is distracted with his presence so close. They stare at each other in silence for a few seconds. And the protagonist soon asks the name of his opponent. That ugly and bizarre man would be Gu Pyungho. He would be one of the 7 disciples of one of the 8 supreme demons, who was Gu Chiempa, the demon of the blood-stained sword of heaven. He is the 5th disciple and soon says that it seems that ugly man is very confident in his abilities to mess with him. Reasoning the protagonist didn't know something in the past, but at that moment, he already knew. Because of his eyes, his father already knew he was poisoned with the energy-dispersing poison. He was watching how his son would overcome that very problematic and complicated situation. Since the protagonist still had the knowledge from his past life, he could defeat his opponent in a single move, but he couldn't reveal his true ability there. And then he announces to everyone gathered there that he will fight Gu Pyungho without using any internal energy. Everyone is perplexed and astonished by that decision, most of them showing expressions of concern and shock. Even his opponent is impressed by such audacity. He truly had a lot of courage, and then everyone cheers for the unbeatable swordsman. His enemy curses him with great anger, and soon proclaims that he too will not use the internal energy within his body. Everyone watches and listens to this with great attention. Soon murmurs are heard about how the fight will be very boring since no internal energy will be used by either side. The protagonist's enemy curses him again and says that even without using his internal energy, he better be careful because his sword has no eyes and cuts anything it hits. He then feels strange in that body and wonders about his movement because he doesn't know if it will be fully efficient, and soon demands that his opponent unsheathes his sword immediately. He also mocks him a lot, saying that he won't need to use his sword against such an enemy. Everyone laughs at that situation because the protagonist was evidently underestimating his opponent. And then the ugly man quickly says that he won't kill him because he is the cult leader's son, but that he will definitely take an arm from him. As his opponent advances toward him, the protagonist thinks and realizes that his body is capable of reacting instantly and was faster than he thought. As his enemy gets closer and closer, he suddenly performs a backflip, dodging a blow that would have been fatal. He quickly lands on the ground with his sword firmly in hand. He then realizes that his heart is beating very fast because he is much younger now. His opponent is very angry that he dodged his strike, and for having laughed at him at that moment. The protagonist looks at him with eyes filled with anger and vengeance. The two charge at each other in a frenetically intense fight. That ugly man with orange hair is hit with a powerful elbow strike to his stomach. He groans in pain and agony, and soon receives another blow to the middle of his face, which will probably make him need dentures very soon. The protagonist grabs him by the shirt and prepares to deliver another precise blow quickly. Again, the punch is delivered to his enemy with great success, as the ugly man is sent flying through the air from the force of the strike. The man spits out all the ketchup he used to flavor the protagonist's meal, and his face shows an expression of pain and great despair. He tries to prepare himself to grab his sword, but when he manages to touch it, he is reprimanded by the protagonist's hand. And the protagonist immediately asks his opponent if it was with that filthy hand that he used to administer the poison. His enemy's eyes fill with tears after that question. But the protagonist had no pity for that hand and the arm attached to it. His opponent screams in pain, despair, and agony. The audience screams in shock, surprise, and amazement as the ugly man lies face down on the ground, groaning heavily. The protagonist steps away from the fallen man and thinks that now that he has returned to the past, he will no longer let his actions be influenced by people who want to control his life. His father quickly raises his right hand. The entire audience watches tensely, knowing that this man is about to grant the winner a wish, and the master soon asks what he will want as a prize. He stands still for a few moments, watching his opponent get up. He then thinks that normally people would ask for a craftsman's sword or a secret martial arts manual, which is what everyone would expect. His father stares at him with a serious expression and a stern face, but this time he would follow his instincts and ask for what he truly desired. He requested to go on a hunt in the company of his beloved father. His fatherly figure looks at him again in complete silence, still with a very serious expression. The protagonist's enemy watches all of this in great surprise with a look of intense pain and agony. The protagonist's father asks if that is really what his son desires, and he is answered affirmatively, as he greatly wants to learn to hunt with his father. Once again, he is stared at by the man with slanted eyes and a stern face. The man prepares to rise from his majestic throne. Standing up, he says that at dawn, the two will leave for the long-awaited hunt. He turns his back to leave the place, and he leaves while the other people beside him greet him with a hand gesture. His son watches him walk away. His opponent calls him an idiot and a fool because he made an extremely ridiculous wish. But even so, he mocks the ugly man, who becomes enraged by it. Now that he is back to life, the recklessness that everyone else lived by no longer interests him. At sunset, in a very beautiful and red building, the protagonist looks at himself in the mirror and soon realizes that he is indeed very young again and that he looks very different from his old appearance. He looks at himself in the mirror and can see his old face with a horrible scar on his cheek and a worn-out expression, and he wonders what his enemy Honmuji might be doing at that moment. If he could find and kill him before he became strong, the problem would be easily and quickly solved, but Mugi is difficult to find. He had appeared in Jianghu as if he had fallen from the sky. After he destroyed the Orthodox Marim alliances and the demonic cult, he soon hid in the world, leaving no traces or information, and trying to find him by saying his name to everyone would be a dangerous and very provocative act. In the end, the protagonist's intention is only to become stronger than Honmuji. While he is standing with his back to a bookshelf full of books, someone calls his name and congratulates him on fighting extremely well that day. That person standing there is Leon. She is very cute and would be the young master's bodyguard. And suddenly, the protagonist reflects on his companion's size and the fact that everything had been because of her. The body petrification technique allows the user to gain the ability to make their body resistant, and it is a secret technique known by his bodyguard. The only flaw in this martial art is that it makes the body enormous, and that girl had saved the protagonist by using herself as a human shield. His guardian soon asks why he is looking at her so pensively. He also thinks that he never noticed how pleasant her voice was. He immediately feels regret because he saw her as a mere guardian, but she was willing to sacrifice her life for her dear friend back then. He took her for granted in the same way that people take oxygen in the air for granted. He stares at her for a few seconds in absolute silence, and thinks that she is taller than he used to remember. The guardian is left speechless and somewhat confused by her friend's lack of words. Everyone said that Leon would become the greatest beauty in the world if she continued to grow that way. But even being so beautiful and perfect, she ended up getting very fat one day and became the young master's guardian. The protagonist didn't know that she cried a lot because she had gained so much weight, and he never realized that her eyes were puffy for that reason. He wonders how she must have felt because she gave up her appearance when she had the chance to become the greatest beauty in the world. He also thinks that perhaps he treated her more and more coldly as she gained weight. His eyes and expression of regret soon appear and are very obvious, and he silently promises her one thing, that he will get rid of the side effects of her body petrification technique. She asks if everything is okay with her friend because he remains very quiet. With his mouth closed, he continues to be speechless, but soon he says that he is fine and that he is feeling very good. And she retorts, saying he is acting very strangely. The protagonist thinks that this is to be expected because she cared a lot about him and noticed that he had changed his behavior a lot lately. He calls her to show her something very unusual and strange. She immediately asks where they are going at that moment, and he replies that chaos will be caused by them. They quickly arrive at a place where many people are dressed in gray. The protagonist asks one of them why he did such a thing. That old man with a white beard and closed eyes doesn't understand the reason for the questioning. The young master stares at a boy with serious, fixed eyes and asks why that boy poisoned his meal with an energy-dissipating poison. Upon hearing this, the guardian is very confused and surprised. The boy quickly denies all that information, but he had received 3,000 Niangs and had probably already gambled it all away. He had a huge debt because he was addicted to gambling, sent all his parents' money, and even the money from loans, and that's why he accepted to poison the food. He laments a lot and asks for forgiveness because he had been blinded by the Niangs offered to him. The protagonist questions whether Gukumno was present to pay the promised money, and the boy quickly confirms, saying that the ugly man had made the payment in person. Suddenly, the boy is killed by a powerful strike from an extremely sharp and potent sword. Everyone around screams in despair and shock at the scene, but the protagonist does not regret ending that person's life, as he was insolent and truly lacked character. The old man with the beard pleads for forgiveness and says he will take full responsibility. But the young master is confused as the one to blame is already dead, and he is quickly retorted as everything that happens in that kitchen is the old man's responsibility. He then stares at the gray-bearded old man and asks Cooklim if everything unjust that happens in the cult is his dear father's fault. The cook doesn't quite understand the question, so he quickly responds, saying that his apologies should not be interpreted in that way. Again, he is asked why he is blaming himself so much. The young master orders him to stop saying foolish things and to quickly prepare some tasty shredded chicken noodles because he already missed that dish. That poor old man with the white beard is left speechless. The protagonist is then questioned about missing the food as he had eaten that dish just a few days ago. He turns and stares at his guardian. She is also left speechless, looking at the young master. He thinks that for him, decades have already passed. The day after, at dawn in the Celestial Demon Pavilion, the protagonist's father asks what those things on him are, and he is told that they are items that will be very useful in the upcoming days of hunting. His father says he had only planned for a day of hunting, but he is quickly told that if they end up enjoying it, perhaps a few more days will be spent. The master stares at his son with the same serious and strange look as always, and he soon says that the protagonist has a very big and ambitious dream. Already among the enormous mountains and cliffs, they walk through the trees of that place. The young master soon says that his father is better at this than he had imagined, and he wonders if his father noticed that he hid his skills developed in his past life while fighting Gukyeongo. He then also considers telling him everything, as it might be much better. He reveals that he indeed hid all of his abilities, and his father responds affirmatively, as he had already noticed it. The protagonist says he is not a boy who hisses, but a beast that hides its sharp claws. His father listens to all of this attentively and turns, asking why a fearsome beast would hide its so powerful claws. The young master responds, saying he didn't think of it that way, and he has retorted, as that is the reason he is still just a kitten. His father questions how much of the Crescent sword art he has already mastered. That technique is only passed down through the lineage of the celestial demons, and it is an extremely advanced martial art, very similar to the one learned by the supreme demonic beings. The protagonist had already mastered it completely. Suddenly, a massive explosion occurs beside him. It was a shot, and if he hadn't dodged, his cheek would have been blown off. His father confirms the complete mastery, but his son is very worried, as it could have hit him even with the ritual completed. But if he were hit, it would be the price to pay for the lie he told, and since his face resembles his father's, it wouldn't look good with a scar. His father stares at him after that remark. He thinks he may have revealed too much information. The master says that since his son completed the mastery at such a young age, he deserves congratulations. The boy looks at him, both apprehensive and enthusiastic after that compliment, and they continue walking through the dense, closed forest. Soon the boy thanks his father for acknowledging his effort. The master ends up stopping mid-walk and placing his hand on the ground while the protagonist observes everything. It appears to be the trail of some prey, and his son asks how he acquired the hunting skill. He is told that he learned it from his older brother. The boy then asks, surprised, if he really had an uncle. Indeed, he did, but his father killed him when the boy was the same age as he is now. The protagonist falls silent and quiet after receiving that shocking information, and he says that his father did well to kill his uncle. The master stares at him with a very serious look after hearing that. But the boy quickly adds that if his uncle hadn't died, he wouldn't have been born. His father continues to stare at him without saying a word. They look at each other in complete and absolute silence. The boy soon thinks that his father must have suffered greatly for having fought against his own family, and he confirms this with the lessons he learned in his past life. His fatherly figure says that in the past he found no plausible solution other than to take his brother's life. The young master thinks that his father couldn't find a way to defeat the successor in the war, so he did what he had to do. He tells his father not to think that he too can do the same because he doesn't believe he could accomplish what his father did. And there's no need for the protagonist to even consider doing that because his brother is wicked and very cruel. His fatherly figure stares at him in complete and absolute silence, and then begins to continue on his way. He then tells his son that he is tarnishing his brother's image even though he's not here to hear and defend himself. Huge mountains in the forest are seen. The two climb them with great speed and courage. The young master seems quite tired from it. He then thinks that he didn't marry in his past life, so he really doesn't know what it's like to have children, and he is quite curious to know what that experience would be like. He wonders what kind of existence he would be as a true father. The two quickly reach the top of the enormous and tall mountain. The young master asks his father what is there amid so many trees and plants, and he is told that their dinner is there. The boy, quite naive, says that they need to kill the creature, but he is quickly corrected as no one can kill what they cannot see. His father instructs him to close his eyes and feel everything around him. He responds affirmatively. Then he closes his eyes and focuses intently on sensing what is around him. When martial masters try to discover their opponents, they feel the vibrations in the air around them. People usually call this the energy flow of a being. The protagonist can only feel one energy movement, that of his father, who is very close to him. He is soon instructed to send a little energy in a single line. He has to do it as delicately as possible and think of his body as a soft ball of yarn. Then slowly release the energy as if pulling a thread. He is very focused and attentive to doing all of this, and soon he says that he is starting to feel it. His father then questions his perception of what it might be, and he responds that it is a tree, and he is quickly instructed to search that same area. Very slowly and calmly, the boy concentrates hard on doing it. The energy ends up touching something right there. It was an animal with huge teeth and the appearance of a swine. It was an enormous and ugly wild boar. He wonders if it might be a bear, but the creature had coarse fur and a long body, so it was probably a wild pig. It is confirmed that it was indeed a wild boar. The two remain silent for a brief period of time. His father then says that in the beginning, he also couldn't guess correctly from such a distance. The son quickly responds that he has a body that learns martial arts easily, so it's not surprising that he mastered it on his first try. His father stares at him with the same stern and angry face as always after his son's sarcasm. A campfire is made after all that. His father asks when he learned to prepare hunted animals for cooking, as his skill is impressive. He quickly responds that it was from a book. He thanks him for the compliment and quickly thinks that it's because he hunted countless wild boars to eat before regressing. He tells his father that he prepared what he's sitting on to win his favor and that it was worth carrying all that heavy luggage. And he is soon questioned if he went hunting with his father just because he wanted to impress him and become the successor. He quickly replies in the negative because that would never work with him. and he can become the successor on his own without anyone's help. His father says that he has a lot of confidence in himself and questions the real reason why the boy wanted to hunt with him. There were two reasons. The first goal had already been accomplished, which was to learn all this to become stronger. The second goal is left unsaved by the boy. He then says that he feared his father might misunderstand because he didn't want to become stronger to be the celestial demon, and he wasn't going to waste his youth on that. He would be satisfied if he could learn the martial arts of the divine demonic being and become a successor. He then remains silent for a few brief moments. He thinks that he must quickly acquire the demonic art of the 9 calamities in order to master it and go beyond this level. Closing his eyes and concentrating on his thoughts, he reasons that even with his father mastering the technique, he's still lost to Hoamuji. He would at least need to learn it. He is suddenly asked about the second reason. He is a bit startled because he was deep in thought, and he quickly responds that he just wanted to spend some time alone with his father, and this would be their first time doing that. His fatherly figure says that this is a useless emotion and that will end up killing him. The young master is confused because his father is incredible, being the strongest person in the world, and everything he does is perfect to observe. His fatherly figure stares at him for a few seconds. Then he turns his face away from his son, showing a very thoughtful and even regretful expression, but he remains silent without saying a word. Whenever the young master tried to remember his father, he had no memories of him because only bad recollections existed. In this life, he didn't want to have only those bad memories filled with fear, but his father shouldn't be happy because it wasn't about him, it was for the protagonist. At dawn, the young master already intends to leave that place, but his father rebukes that intention, saying they need to return with at least a tiger from there. The boy is puzzled by his master's goodwill, and is soon instructed not to stand idle like a fool and to follow him. He responds very enthusiastically in the affirmative. Amidst many green and giant bamboo trees, his father instructs him to close his eyes again. The target is to the right, 100 meters away, much farther than the last prey. His master wants him to feel the wind this time and infuse his energy into that calm breeze. He thinks that in all the time he spent learning martial arts, he never infused his power into something so unusual because there was no one to teach him, and he is soon ordered to release his energy right there. If he is slow and careful, all he will end up with is a petty trick, and if he wants to use this in a real situation, he must hit the target quickly. His energy begins to develop. He can feel it along with the wind and wonders how he would combine the two at the same time. The energy moves amid all that, and seems to take a direction as it does. The young master tries his best, fully concentrated, and soon discovers that infusing with the wind is not about walking on it, but intertwining the two at the same time. Based on those actions, the energy begins to move toward the bamboo and quickly passes through them, seeming to reach something with lots of fur. It was a beautiful but very angry feline with a look of rage. The young master is startled by this and quickly opens his eyes, telling his father that there really is a tiger there. His fatherly figure asks what happened and scolds his son for stopping, saying that the more energy he releases and maintains, the greater his chances of survival, to which the boy responds affirmatively. A canteen with a liquid was his father's strongest ace up his sleeve. The two drink the contents of the container. His father stares at him with the canteen in hand, saying that it's really good. The boy lies, saying that it's still too strong for him, and his father tensely responds, saying that no demonic human would complain about liquor being too strong. He retorts, saying that having a cruel heart is much more important than that, but his father questions whether his son would have the courage to kill him. The boy lies again, denying that he would do that, but if he had reasons to take his life, he would definitely kill him without mercy. This was the first time the two had a decent conversation that day, and the protagonist couldn't value his life before his father's. He quickly reaffirms that he wouldn't kill him. His fatherly figure then says that if, at that point, he falters, he doesn't have a truly cruel heart. The protagonist responds by saying that he will learn to drink strong liquor then, and takes a large gulp of the liquid quickly. His father stares at him without saying a word. Back in the city's buildings, the young master meditates in the middle of a room, lamenting something. He wears a thoughtful and sad expression. He reasons that after focusing on a few days of training since his regression, he can now infuse his energy into the wind freely, maintaining 3 or 4 lines. He didn't expect his father to teach him those things, and it was as good as gaining an extra life because now he could detect an enemy lurking first. And if he continues training and manages to release more than 10 lines of energy at the same time, finally he would be able to neutralize any stealth techniques used by his enemies. But there was a catch to all of this. Even his father, who was much more skilled, lost to Hoamuji because the Celestial Demon Pavilion was infiltrated. The complex is a place that was carefully protected by 3 barrier formations, 6 sets of traps, and a carefully selected elite group. There were also 8 supreme demons in different directions, along with their subordinates, protecting the Celestial Demon. In the north were the demon swordsmen of the Northern Heaven Sword family, led by the supreme of the One-Strike Sword. In the south were the demon swordsmen of the Southern Heaven Blade Group, led by the swordsmen of Heaven's Blood. In the east were the Iron Fists of the Eastern Fist faction, led by the undefeated Fist Demon. To the west were the demon sorcerers of the Western Illusion formation, led by the Soul-Stealing Demon. In the northeast were the faceless swordsman who aspired to become the demon of the malicious smile. In the southeast was the drunken swordsman, always intoxicated with the drunken demon. In the southwest were the poison fangs who research all kinds of poisons alongside the poison king. And finally, in the northwest were the mad monks, obsessed with the beliefs of the demon Buddha, who deceives the world. At that time, the protagonist thought the enemies had invaded from outside, but that wasn't the case, and he later realized that the external defenses had been breached. He is certain that someone among the other supreme demons let Huomuji into the celestial demon pavilion where he was hiding, and there may have been more than one traitor who was never found. But it doesn't matter who it was because he treats all 8 supreme demons as traitors. After his father died, none of the 8 supreme demons sought revenge. Instead, they decided to close the demonic cult. That event is still far in the future, so he knows everything about them, how their lives were, and how their final moments played out. The young master begins to pace in the room he's in, firmly holding his sword in hand, and he thinks that this time he will use the 8 supreme demons in every way possible. As he walks toward the exit, he hears someone offensively asking about him to his guardian. The man says he can't stand waiting any longer and asks Lee to fetch him immediately. She becomes very angry, but soon the young master arrives, asking what she's doing there. Lee is very surprised by his sudden appearance. He had earnestly asked her to take care of her life while he trained, but she disobeyed. The man who was there celebrates the appearance of the second young master and questions him about why he's been training so much. The man's name was Yang Po, and he was a disciple of the swordsman of heaven's blood. The reason he acted so rudely was because of the celestial demon. After the celestial demon announced the possibility that anyone could become the successor, being his son no longer seemed so special and fueled the ambitious desires of many. The protagonist asks what the man wants. He responds by saying that Pyeongil can no longer practice martial arts after the fight they had. The conversation heats up after some mocking exchanges. After the protagonist mocks him again, the man demands that he go and apologize immediately for crippling his friend. The young master already knows why all this is happening. It's because the best disciple of the swordsman of heaven's blood wasn't selected, and that's why his subordinates were trying to impress him. Yang Po wanted to make him apologize so he could later boast about it. The protagonist quickly provokes his enemy, saying that his leader would never choose him as the best disciple just because of all this. That opponent soon gets very irritated, saying that all this is nonsense because he's only doing it for Pyeongil's sake. The young master tries to put an end to it and says that he wants his enemy's apology immediately. He is questioned about this unusual decision, but all of this was because that man had spoken rudely to his subordinate. The man still doesn't understand it. Lee insists that she's fine, but the second young master remains furious about what happened. She is left speechless by all the defense from her superior. The protagonist then orders Yang Po to kneel and apologize to his subordinate immediately. He mocks and calls her fat again. The man spoke too much once again and got angry again, saying he'd rather die than kneel before the girl. That was exactly what the protagonist wanted to hear, and he was about to grant his enemy's wish because he was going to kill him. He draws his sharp and enormous sword. His opponent becomes very tense at the sight of it, and Lee watches everything with a look of intense fear. Yang Po calls the second young master a complete madman. The protagonist quickly gives 2 options, an apology or a fight. He provokes his enemy by talking about how dissatisfied his master would be if he decided to back down. He is soon questioned about the reason for all of this, and he responds that he doesn't care and even understands the group's pursuit of revenge. But he would not tolerate insults to his subordinate under any circumstances. Lee watches her friend say all this with a look of great surprise. Yang Po laughs and calls the guardian a pig, but the protagonist doesn't lower his guard because she means a lot to him. His enemy immediately draws his huge sword. All of his friends tell him not to attack. Even Lee tries to stop the fight, but the battle was already set between the two. Since the protagonist was the son of the celestial demon, Yang Po only wanted to take one of his arms as a trophy from the fight. The second young master listens to those words intently, without any apparent concern. Everyone around them is tense and fearful. The enemy prepares with his enormous and sharp sword and charges at the protagonist without mercy. But he is quickly and easily stopped by the protagonist with a precise strike to the face. His friends are shocked after witnessing this. Lee is greatly surprised by the blow. The cause of Yang Po's death was his own mouth. He had used it to hurl insults at Lee and had also refused to apologize. The protagonist pulls his sword from Yang Po's mouth, who quickly falls to the ground dead. The second young master displays a look of conviction in his victory. All of Yang Po's friends rush toward him deeply concerned, and they ask the protagonist if he can handle the consequences of the actions he just committed. He quickly responds by saying that their mouths are just like their dead friends. The second young master orders them to repeat what he says without changing a word, or they will suffer the consequences brutally. They quickly leave, dragging their dear friend's body. Lee asks her friend why he did all that. She reaffirms the question, saying that no one would do such things for someone like her. The protagonist thinks that even though Lee On was frequently emotionally wounded, she still cared about him. He soon responds that it wasn't for her because he only killed someone who deserved to die, and she retorts, saying that the swordsman of heaven's blood wouldn't let that go easily. He looks at her after hearing that. It was natural for Lee to be scared because the eight masters wield a lot of influence. They have prowess and subordinates that even the celestial demon cannot ignore, and the swordsman of heaven's blood was one of them. The protagonist had beaten one of his disciples and killed the other. The young master quickly says that he has nothing to gain by getting involved because it was his fault for not properly educating his subordinates, but she retorts, saying that his pride would be hurt. He responds by saying that the swordsman isn't that prideful. He slowly raises his hand toward Lee, places his fingers on her shoulder, and says that she wouldn't need to put so much effort into protecting him. She stares at him with wide eyes. He starts to walk away from her, thinking that there's a lot to gain by killing his enemy. He had crushed Gu Pyongo and killed Yang Po, so in this way he would attract a lot of attention and could even earn some points in the succession struggle. Suddenly, he is called by Lee and thanked by her for that day. She was very happy that he had stood by her, and she said it from the bottom of her heart. The protagonist turns his face with a small smile on his face without saying a word, and he quickly responds harshly, saying it's good that she's grateful and that she shouldn't forget it, to which she agrees. He walks away, continuing forward, thinking about how nice it is to see Leon smiling like that. The moon was already appearing in the sky. Meanwhile, the protagonist is sitting on a large stone with a very downcast expression. He then thinks that he had sunk into a feeling of defeat after fleeing. He had felt so depressed that if he didn't have a goal, he would certainly already be dead. He wonders how things would have been if he hadn't discovered the Great Regression technique. Suddenly, his eyes widen. An orange light appears beside him. He looks at himself in that light, which forms a kind of mirror. The light continues to pass beside him, and then an old man with a beard and a sword appears. He observes him intently at that moment. That man was the swordsman of heaven's blood. He hadn't expected his arrival so quickly and wondered how he could dodge the sword in his current state. Even with his knowledge from his past life, he still lacked the internal energy to be capable of that. The sword passed very close to his neck. He stayed alert, observing the moment. But the swordsman also sat down on the stone. He watched him without saying a word. The man with yellow eyes and a white beard also said nothing and soon asked why the protagonist had done all of that, to which he replied that it was because the man had acted like a complete idiot. The old man seemed a bit confused by this and asked if his subordinates had picked a fight with the son of the celestial demon, who doesn't give a damn about real idiots. Then he fell silent for a few moments and quickly raised his sharp sword. He immediately questioned the protagonist about cutting off his head and taking it to his subordinate. The young master defended himself by bringing up his father's name to intimidate the swordsman, who then seemed to regret those threats, and immediately moved the sword away from the boy. He dragged the sword toward the ground, making 2 deep marks on the soil with great force. The protagonist didn't understand that sudden action. Those marks signified how much the celestial demon cared. The young master's portion was the smaller one, while the larger one belonged to the old man. The boy was speechless upon learning this information and turned his face, deep in thought. He placed his finger on the smaller mark and said that being the son of the celestial demon meant it mattered, so it would be a 7, while the swordsman was only a 3. The old man laughed after hearing such a low score and said they would only know for sure after testing it by killing the protagonist and presenting his head to his beloved father. A second young master responded, saying how much the swordsman underestimated the paternal love of the celestial demon. The old man gripped his sword tightly and said that because of all that, they would indeed test both statements. The boy grew very tense, fearing for his life at that moment. He said there was no need, as his father had 2 sons, and the swordsman was just one. The man laughed again after hearing that and said the boy wasn't as foolish as his disciple. The protagonist then prepared to stand up and said that if the old man's disciples were a little like him, they would still be alive. The gray-haired man called out to the second young master and said that he had lived much of his life amid a lot of bad luck and hoped never to see him again. The boy responded by saying he would remember everything that had been said and began to walk away from there very cautiously. He widened his eyes after everything, feeling quite relieved. He then watched the swordsman disappear into the trees on that dark night. Still gazing at the sky beside that enormous stone, he soon groaned in pain from the blow he was feeling. He tried to lift his pajama shirt and noticed 2 large marks from the strike. That damn old man had done that with the hilt of his sword. The boy stood there thinking in silence for a few moments. He reasoned that the old swordsman might seem to act on impulse, but he planned and calculated everything meticulously before putting it into practice. The fact that he repeatedly mentioned wanting to take the protagonist's head to his father meant that he truly intended to do it. That swordsman had come to see the second young master and found the boy's wish to hunt with his father unique. The old man felt the need to test the boy since, in addition to everything he had done, he had also killed one of his disciples. That's why he wanted to see if the boy was worthy of succession. That celestial demon of the blood sword might be the protagonist's first opponent. The boy was concentrating, eyes closed, while training. The energy emanating from him at that moment was evident. The energy beams began to move towards something. The boy quickly opened his eyes, startled by something. A step was heard on the roof of the building he was in, and he quickly climbed up there. At the top of the building, the boy gripped his sword tightly and soon spotted the person standing on the roof. He watched closely as the man looked at the sky from atop the roof. It was his beloved father who was there. He immediately stared at him with the usual serious expression, and then said that he had heard that the boy had killed the disciple of the celestial demon of the blood sword. The boy listened attentively to the serious and calm expression and soon responded by confirming the fact because the disciple truly deserved to have his life taken. His father retorted very angrily, saying that whether or not he deserved to die, the celestial demon of the blood sword had come after him because of that incident, and he wanted the protagonist to receive punishment immediately. The second young master repeats this information in the form of a question, and it is confirmed, even though it seems like an unusual request coming from such a person. The protagonist quickly thinks that his enemy is trying to test the relationship he has with his father to see if he will be punished for what he did. Knowing this, he will also discover whether his father considers him a candidate for the succession of the throne. His father soon affirms that he indeed intends to punish him for what he did. The boy retorts, saying that there's no reason for such punishment, but he is told that justifications can always be made. He listens to all this, tense and shocked by his master's decision. The leader brings back a question the boy had asked about who the most trustworthy supreme demon would be. The young master confirms that he had indeed asked that question. He had inquired about whom his father trusted the most among all the supreme demons while they drank liquor by the campfire. At that time, his father had remained silent after the question. No answer was given back then. But at that moment, his father answers, saying that he trusts no one, not even the supreme demons, leaving his son utterly surprised. The boy had said that hierarchy and discipline need to be established, but his father wanted to hear his true thoughts without any nonsense about corruption. His fatherly figure waits patiently for an answer, staring at him. The second young master remains silent for a few moments, then prepares to say what he wanted. He feels that at some point they lost the way of the demon. His father listens to this with great tension and concern. He repeats the information in question, and his son responds affirmatively. He then asks what the way of the demon means to the boy. The boy thinks it's merely a belief that only that cult holds to defeat absolute evil. His father asks, reaffirming the information given, and the boy confirms, adding that he doesn't believe the Orthodox faction is the direct opposite of the cult. His father then asks what it is then. The boy replies that it is absolute evil. That complete malignancy is so cowardly and wicked that no human in the world can endure it. Even demons would despise it and distance themselves from it. The Orthodox faction wouldn't be able to deal with true absolute evil. After all, that organization is fundamentally rooted in being indulgent. As long as they value people, how could they match the evil whose humanity has lost control? They would be the only existence within Murim capable of eliminating evil that is heinous and perverse by being even more perverse. The second young master says, when the great malignancy, which even the Orthodox faction cannot handle, kneels before him and his father, that will be when they have truly fulfilled the way of the demon. His father widens his eyes after hearing all this from his son. The boy continues, saying that if they cannot fulfill the true way of the demon, they will not be able to go far and must punish themselves so they can survive. That master remains very silent and serious after hearing more of this from his dear son. The boy looks directly at his father and thinks that he must have never thought about this before or heard anything like it. This was not something the boy learned or realized while in the cult, but something he felt while wandering the Central Plains throughout his life. His father asks if he has any more arrogant thoughts. The boy looks sad after hearing this and says that just that was enough to say. As the boy frowns, his father says that now he understands why the celestial demon of the blood sword wanted him punished immediately. That old man had seen something in the boy and wanted to use his father to test him. The second young master says that the old man saw a possibility of him being a potential successor to the throne. But his father retorts, saying that he thinks the boy only has the potential to mess up the entire cult. The boy quickly responds that the old man has good eyes to notice the extraordinary. The master remains silent for a few seconds. He asks his son to follow him quickly. The boy immediately asks where they are going so late at night. They were heading to the Lesser Celestial Cave. Upon arriving, there is a huge gate amidst a large stone cliff. The young master quickly thinks that this is the place where a potential candidate for the throne goes to be tested and trained before truly gaining power in the cult. Entering there was easy, but those who couldn't pass the tests would be trapped forever with only a 50% success rate. Half would also lose their lives. That place was so dangerous that even the protagonist's ambitious brother never mentioned wanting to enter. But if he wanted to be a true celestial demon, he would have to successfully pass through there at least once. His father asks him to enter that place because at about his age, he had also entered. The boy asks how long it took him to get out, and he is told exactly 2 months. The young master is very surprised because his father was known as the most talented in martial arts among all the celestial demons, and even so, it took him that long. His fatherly figure quickly adds that he was the only one who managed to get out in 2 months because on average, the others took 3 years. As punishment, the boy would enter there without any protection. The two remain silent for a while. The boy thinks that his father is sending him to a place where he might die just because the celestial demon of the blood sword wanted it. He wonders if his father really doesn't care about him or wishes for him to come out of there alive and much stronger than before. The boy's face shows great sadness. but he soon forms a small, timid smile and tells his father that he will try to get out even earlier, breaking the record. His fatherly figure only tells him to stay alive in there. The protagonist slowly enters the place, taking very short steps. He walks further into the area, with blue lights lined up along the sides. He thinks about how terrible that place must be for so many people to remain there. He silently observes an immense door in front of him. He walks toward it very slowly, carefully observing everything around him. Then 5 rules appear, giving instructions on everything that will happen there and the chances he will have. He reads everything attentively, and then considers eating some of the grain balls that were right there, but quickly decides not to waste any more time and start the mission immediately. Suddenly, something appears around him. Many enemies emerge, surrounding him. Some red marks are seen on these opponents, and the protagonist quickly realizes that he must strike with his sword where those marks are. He begins to strike the enemies frantically with precise blows. His expression is one of intense concentration and anger, while his eyes show a strong desire to achieve his goal. He delivers countless precise strikes to all the mannequins there. Embers flies after each strike of his sword. Those mannequins were more resistant than he had anticipated. He looks around with great attention and thinks that he cannot let those opponents go underground because they would move away. He quickly heads toward the fleeing ones, dodges all the debris from the opponents, takes a huge leap high into the air, and lands a precise strike, cutting the mannequin into several pieces. In motion, he observes everything around him with great attention and calm. Then he spots the last remaining opponent. He quickly runs toward the mannequin, which was already almost entirely submerged in the ground. Only its head remained on the surface, but the protagonist quickly manages to finish off the last objective. Relieved, he thinks that he almost had to spend more days there because he had let his guard down, and it would have been impossible to pass this test with his previous abilities. He silently observes the battlefield and walks toward a door. He notices something written on the walls of the place. There were some accounts of the number of attempts, as well as many questions about life left behind by those who had been there before. The protagonist observes a very familiar handwriting in front of him. It was the handwriting of his father written there in that place. Although his father wasn't wrong, he couldn't believe that he had reprimanded all of their ancestors. After passing by the writings, he carefully observes what lies ahead. There were many weapons on the walls and an enormous red circle on the floor. The protagonist observes everything with great attention and caution, thinking that given the number of weapons in that place, it would probably be necessary to use all of them to complete the mission successfully. 3 instructions are given to the protagonist, including warnings and an order to stand inside the crimson circle if he was ready. He steps into the red circle marked on the ground as he is already prepared for the start of the mission. A boulder with a circle on top quickly rises from the ground. He observes it in front of him in total and complete silence, without saying a word. He thinks he has too much time to complete the simple task of cutting the boulder in half and would likely be able to cut hundreds of them in 2 hours using the power of his sword. He also reasons that there must be a reason for the instruction that appeared moments before. He quickly grips his sword firmly in his hands and strikes the boulder with all the strength his body possesses. But the sword broke in half despite being quite strong, and he concluded that simply striking it like that wouldn't work to complete the mission successfully. The protagonist then decided to use the enhanced weapon aura to quickly pass the test without too many difficulties and adversities. The sharp and pointed sword glowed with a bright blue light, just like his left eye, which also shone intensely. The protagonist suddenly widened his eyes with a look of intense focus. He remained silent for a brief period, in absolute and complete silence. With his weapon already prepared to strike, he decided to stop because it would be too easy to complete the mission in such a simple way. He wondered how the other people who had passed through there before had managed to finish it. He quickly ran back to the inscriptions. Many accounts said they only completed the objective by using the enhanced sword aura. Only one mentioned not using the power. Many writings agreed that it was impossible to succeed without using the enhanced weapon, but the protagonist wondered how his father had completed the mission. His father's account mentioned that it was all complete nonsense and that if there was heat, the person would lose. The protagonist was confused by why his father had said that, as his usual behavior would have been just to reprimand them and end everything. The mission's instructions reappeared, and the young master pondered over them, realizing that the message didn't say he had to use the power, but that he could. He quickly uncovered the solution. He would only succeed in the mission by not using the aura, and that's what his father was trying to convey in that inscription. He then began to strike the hard sphere. An axe was also used for that purpose. Even a hammer was tried at that moment. The protagonist grew increasingly angry and desperate because his time was running out, and he hadn't even made a mark on the sphere. He quickly thought he should just use the aura to finish the mission and be done with it. His teeth ground in frustration. He thought hard and let out a loud scream. His father had split the sphere in half without even using the enhanced sword aura. Suddenly, an idea came to his mind. He closed his eyes and focused on everything around him. The energy he emitted moved toward the hard sphere. All the light beams focused on the sphere. The boy quickly widened his eye. He could perceive and detect a subtle line that he hadn't been able to see with just his eyes when looking at the sphere. He grabbed his sword to attempt to strike. As it wasn't an illusion, There was indeed a perfect circle around the circumference of the sphere. He closed his eyes and concentrated on his strike. The sword moved so quickly that it left a large white trail of light. After the strike, the sphere split perfectly in half. The boy was very happy and celebrated because he had achieved that feat. But something was still inside the sphere. It was something quite interesting and useful. It was a demonic essence pill. If a demonic human who had learned demonic martial arts consumed the pill, they would be able to gain an enormous amount of energy. The protagonist quickly realized that if he had cut the sphere with the enhanced sword aura, the demonic essence would have exploded due to the high temperature. It was a fine reward given to the person who cut the sphere solely and exclusively with the weapon. The second young master then thanked his father, who had written in the message not to generate heat while trying to complete the mission as he swallowed the pill. He sat on the ground, closing his eyes and concentrating as intense purple energy radiated from his body. His expression was one of pure concentration, and his face clearly reflected that. The purple light on his body grew stronger and more radiant. All the energy spread throughout the environment while he sat with his sword on the ground beside him. He finally opened his eyes after everything, feeling very relieved. He slowly rose from the ground and clenched his fist tightly, feeling the strength in his body, realizing that his body had become much stronger than before because what he had been lacking was energy, and now he had obtained what he needed. Instructions for the next mission appeared again, to distinguish between life and death. He was confused, wondering what kind of test that would be. As he was already prepared, he quickly entered the Crimson Circle to begin the mission. The second young master widened his eyes and observed, right in front of him, some kinds of leaves, branches, plants, and flowers. This test required him to distinguish between good herbs and bad ones that could be very harmful to health. He thought carefully about how to complete the mission, his expression serious. He then remembered searching everywhere for the ingredients that Ju Rai-Anja had requested. Because of that, he already knew how to differentiate all types of poisonous herbs and plants and even knew their effects on the human body. This test was easy for him to complete. He quickly reached for a leaf that was there. The plant with its many leaves and bright green color was the only thing that wasn't poisonous. He analyzed it carefully, holding it firmly in his hand. He looked again at the panel with all the plants laid out on it. He then considered that there must be a second test to prevent anyone from passing purely by luck. Those who knew nothing would have to consume everything to find out what was safe. He held a stem with some leaves in his hand and carefully analyzed it. He looked back at the table with the plants and realized that no new mission had appeared after he completed that one. He wondered if that was the end of everything. The second young master widened his eyes as he noticed something out of the corner of his eye and moved back toward the writings on the wall. Many accounts of poisonous plants and numerous attempts were there, along with many desperate writings from those who had passed through there before. The protagonist's father had written not to rely on luck, which meant he remembered everything he ate from the first test. Then the instructions for the final test appeared. The second young master had to survive an illusion formation, the trap of life or death. If he failed that trial, he would certainly die. The writings on the wall spoke of that test with great terror, as it was very frightening and difficult. His father's writing advised his son not to rest, leaving him a little confused as he read it. The second young master, holding his sharp sword, thought that although his father had left some tips for that test, it also seemed to be advice on how he should live his life from that moment on. Suddenly, he heard a noise and became very alert. His eyes widened in intense focus. Suddenly, he found himself in a sort of desert, looking around, not understanding much. The place had very realistic fauna and a strong wind. It all seemed very real and convincing. He was impressed because he didn't think the illusion formation of the trap of life or death could create things so real. Out of nowhere, he heard a noise coming from around him and looked closely to see what it was. Many people with zombie-like faces suddenly appeared there. Even though it was all just an illusion, the protagonist could feel their presence entirely and could even sense their intent to kill him. The second young master then thought that all of this was indeed a great opportunity for him. He quickly drew his enormous, sharp sword from its sheath, holding it in front of the hideous and terrifying zombies, who became enraged upon seeing him holding a weapon to attack them. They charged at the protagonist without mercy, intending to kill him. The second young master's eyes widened in a look of despair as he saw everything unfold, as there were many enemies against just him. He then dodged a fatal blow from one of the zombies and managed to counterstrike his enemy fatally in the face. But there were still countless opponents ahead, and it would be very difficult to defeat them all alone without anyone's help. Despite all this, the protagonist refused to give up, even though the scenario was unfavorable for him. He thought that since he was no longer dealing with mere humans, he could fight them without hesitation and without mercy. Thanks to the demonic essence pill, he could use his energy easily, without difficulty or adversity. The swords and weapons of all his opponents were pointed at him, ready to wound him without mercy. From all sides, there were well-armed opponents with sharp and pointed objects that would certainly do significant damage to human skin. But the protagonist wasn't afraid and looked at all with great courage, as he was fearless and brave. He then observed all his opponents with great calm and caution, holding his weapon firmly. He stared intently at the zombies without hesitation, as they all charged at him, well armed without mercy, intending to kill him. He took a brief breath to focus and start the battle quickly. All the zombies surrounded him, intent on causing him immense harm. Suddenly, a blue energy beam shot out from the protagonist, heading toward all his opponents. They are left confused, not understanding what is happening at that exact moment. Quickly, they begin to disintegrate due to the force of the energy unleashed by the second young master. Suddenly, they start to fall apart easily as the protagonist commands it all calmly, without hesitation. A lot of ketchup is seen splattering around the area due to the battle against the zombies. The second young master raises his sword amidst the catastrophic battle scene. He firmly grips his sharp weapon at his side. He carefully scans his surroundings with a keen eye, wondering if it all ended so easily in such a short time of battle and struggle. A dense gray dust surrounds him, and he thinks it would be a shame if that were all there was to it. Once again, the second young master widens his eyes, his expression filled with intense focus. A small, subtle smile forms at the corner of his mouth as he realizes that it isn't over yet, because the energy he senses coming from the area is even more powerful. Mujuk swings his katana with fierce determination in yet another strike. Even with an entire army before him, the young man focuses on continuing to strike them down, fighting for his victory and survival. However, he grows worried as he notices his enemies becoming stronger and stronger. Now he understood the meaning of the words, "Don't rest," for even though he was clearly exhausted, he had no other option there. Then he chanced to his sword, which emanates a blue aura as it slices through one of the knights. It was the first battle that felt real since he regressed. And to keep trying when his life was on the line, he knew he had truly absorbed the knowledge he gained in his past life. Thus, the protagonist kept fighting with all the strength he had, growing stronger by channeling those teachings into his new body. With rage coursing through his veins, he charged at the undead knights, shouting for them to come at him with everything they had. After a true festival of bones, our boy rests his sword on the ground, panting from the exhaustion of a hard-won victory, still wondering if it was really over. The young man is soaked in sweat as he returns to the other room, being congratulated by the panel in front of him. The thought of having his strength used for the advancement of the demonic divine cult makes him smile slightly. It was surprising he had passed all the tests in just one day, while his father had taken a month to do it. Even with his ego inflated, he acknowledges that if this gossip were to spread, it would cause tremendous disorder within the sect. Furthermore, it was likely that people would doubt his achievement rather than praise it. Because of that, he decides that the best course of action would be to stay put, using his free time to train and further enhance his skills. Exactly 100 days later, the young man returns and leaps toward the sacred pagoda. Upon seeing the young man, his father looks at him and comments on how long it took for him to return in a tone of disdain. Even offended, Mujuk sets aside his pride and lies, replying that he did his best, but it was really hard to beat his father's record. Wujin asks if his son managed to cut the iron ball correctly, and he nods, adding that he didn't even rest during the final trial's formation. His father clenches his jaw, but the scowl turns into a proud smile. Mujuk is surprised to catch his father smiling, which was very rare. However, when he looks up again, he sees that his father has a serious face, making him wonder if that smile was just an illusion in his mind. Wujin praises him, saying that apparently he was more talented than the father had thought, to which Mujuk replies that it's a matter of genetics. Hearing that, the old man seems satisfied with the answer. Before, the young man believed his father liked to create rivalry among his children, but now he understood that he could endure even the death of a child for the sake of the sect. From that moment on, he knew for sure that his father took no pleasure in seeing them fight. Interrupting the fatherly moment, someone comments that completing the arduous challenges in the caves in 100 days was no small feat. It was an older and powerful man who had Wujin's full trust, with only one master above him. It was the chief strategist, Myung-sama. Upon recognizing him, the warrior greets him, stating it had been a long time since they last met. The strategist celebrates the young man's presence, as he had been wanting to discuss an important matter for the sect, which surprises Muk. Discuss with him important matters about the cult? His father's hand was definitely behind this. The elder begins to explain that not long ago they had received an anonymous letter claiming the existence of corruption within the demonic army. The information makes the MC think for a bit. After all, the demonic army was one of his combat groups, and it was led by the younger brother of Chiempa-gu, the clever demon. There was no way around it. He would have to cross paths with Chiempa again. Mayon continues his speech, saying they had previously conducted a separate investigation, but it ended with the investigator going to sleep forever. Shocked, Muk asks if it was the demonic army that killed him, and Mayon confirms, adding that the one who got their hands dirty disappeared right after. So many implications and pieces of information made the young man suspicious of the old man's motivation in telling that story. Breaking the silence, the man states that he would like the boy to take on the role of investigator and sort out that mess. It was a very risky mission, where anyone complicit in the corruption would be executed. In other words, those involved would try everything to stay hidden. And even if the investigator in question was the son of the Chiyama, the army would give no truce. Thinking about all of this, the young man says, "Sounds like you're sending me into the lion's den, boss," and the mustached man replies that it could indeed eliminate him. Muk looks at his father, trying to decipher his expressions and realizes this must be one of his tests. Woojin recalls something his son once said, that everyone should control and punish themselves so they could follow the right path. But the boy counters, saying that will only apply after he becomes the celestial demon. In a provocation, the Supreme asks if his son is saying that just because he's afraid to act according to his words in that moment. Feeling challenged, Mook says that following that reasoning, he couldn't refuse the mission. The young man seals the agreement officially, formally accepting the request. Still, his father remains impassive, with an indecipherable expression that the hero mirrors. Thinking to himself he may not know the patriarch's true intentions, but he was willing to show his abilities. Mujik makes one last request before the mission, arguing that it could be their last meeting, so he invites him to drink together. But he's disappointed to see the man get up and walk away from there as quickly as possible. He even tries to lighten the mood, saying to Myung that Woojin is all tough and rude, but deep down he knows his father has a soft heart, something the old man strongly disagrees with. Outside, the young man is introduced to Daryong, a special investigation officer from the Nirvana team, who looked more depressed than anything else. Mujik gets irritated, asking what the guy was doing there since he had specifically asked for the prettiest woman in the pavilion. To which Daryong sarcastically replies that he must be the prettiest woman in their leader's eyes, and the answer seems to leave the warrior even more annoyed. But he shrugs it off, saying they should get started right away, which catches the newbie's attention. The investigator asks if by get started right away, his new boss means they're leaving right now, and Mujik nods. That definitely doesn't excite the young man. As they walk, the MC asks about the commander of the demonic army, and Daryong says his name is Kyeonan-gu, younger brother of Chimpagoo. He adds that it was his 8th winter as commander, and he took on all kinds of risky missions until everyone recognized them as an elite force. The story makes Mujik conclude that he was doing a good job, apparently, and his new companion agrees. As they climb the stairs, he stops and turns to Daryong, which makes him ask if something is wrong. It's not like the young master was really interested, but the companion didn't seem excited about the investigation. Tired, the man denies the accusation. Still, the MC couldn't see a trace of enthusiasm in his gaze or voice, and he explains that even if they discover something, he knows nothing there will change. The MC stares at him for a moment, wondering if he was implying that unless they replaced every member of the army, the sect wouldn't change. He keeps walking, thoughtful, and asks Daryong if he wasn't afraid, to which the young man replies no. Unconvinced, the protagonist insists, asking how that's possible, since the previous investigator had been coldly eliminated, and the newbie reveals that the previous one was his direct superior. That information leaves the hero in complete shock, and Daryong still adds, "He's the one who taught me what I know today." Knowing that, it was understandable that the man constantly had the look of someone on the verge of collapsing, asking how that was possible, given that the former officer. The duo finally arrives at the palace of the demonic dragon, coming face to face with two men who ask where they came from. Daryong introduces himself and says he has business with the commander of the demonic army. Mujik is surprised by the young man's boldness. However, the guards don't seem convinced, stating that he doesn't seem special at all, and that they couldn't pass without permission. The investigator opens his book and pulls out a document showing the official order they had talked so much about, making the guards believe what he said, but they would still need to report it to their supervisor, which in the boy's eyes wasn't necessary. The brutes tell him once again that he can't enter without the superior's permission, and he asks if they really intend to stop his special investigator. A bald one gets irritated, saying he couldn't care less who he was. As long as he's in that place, he'll follow their rules. Daryong feels offended at having his orders dismissed, and the other guard reinforces that without that title, he's all talk and no action. Noticing the tension on his friend's face, Mujik finally intervenes, asking the guards if they know who he is, and to his luck or misfortune, they nod. Then the young man steps forward, surprised by the rude attitude both had, even knowing his identity. Tired of talking, he kicks them in the groin, making them fall from the pain. Daryong freezes until his friend calls his attention, asking if he was still going to show the way or if he preferred to stay right there, and he nods. He didn't need to do that to the guy's god, they dropped in pain. As they move forward, they are greeted by even more giant men who seem to be expecting them. Daryong is already stressed and yells, asking if they're blind not to see that they're obstructing a sanctioned officer, threatening them with arrest. Some of the men laugh while others watch him freak out. A tall and strong man shouts from the back of the group, asking who's causing a ruckus in the place. Once again, Daryong tries to explain his position and demands the man reveal his name and rank. The bald man with a mean look introduces himself as Dang Go, captain of the 1st Division of the Demonic Guard, asking if the kid was satisfied. The investigator recognizes him. He was the first captain in the guard's hierarchy, notorious for committing atrocious acts even among the army. He steps forward, asking why they're all quiet now after being so bold. Daryong introduces himself with his chest puffed out, telling the man to watch his tone, since he's there under official orders. Mocking, the buff guy asks what would happen if he didn't, and the investigator says that everyone there would be arrested for obstructing the investigation. To be sure of what he heard, Dang repeats the official's words, "Arrest me, is that it?" That certainly worried the guard a lot, who laughed in unison as they watched the situation. Meanwhile, Mujik just observes the scene in complete silence. Dang is full of sarcasm, saying he's so scared by those words he might pee his pants, but he'd love to see him try. Daryong doesn't know what to say, and the young master decides to be useful and greets the captain, saying it's been a while since they last met. Shaking his hand, he tries to remember when that happened, concluding it was at a banquet, though Dang looks super confused. However, the boy nearly crushes the bald man's hand with a handshake, explaining he's in a hurry to speak to the commander, asking them to clear the way. And he threatens, saying if the musclehead dares to defy him, he'll never be able to hold a sword with that hand again. Dang tries to keep his cool, finding it funny how some people fool themselves into thinking titles make them immune to a stab in the gut. However, the boy isn't intimidated, asking if the captain really believed he could wield a dagger with that hand when he was done with it. Even so, the bald man says he'd like to see him try, just to know what would hit the floor first, his sword or the guy's insides. The boy is a man of his word and sarcastically thanks the captain for his cooperation, saying he'd buy him a drink one of these days. As they continue walking, Daryong asks if the young master really knew Dango, and he denies it. That was their first encounter. Hearing that leaves his companion confused, and Mujik explains he broke the guy's hand the moment he shook it, so he'd be eating with his left hand for a while. The officer is in disbelief but gets cut off before it becomes a full conversation as the MC tells him to hurry up and lead the way. As they climb the stairs, Daryong says the office is on the 7th floor. Again, the pair runs into more guards who say they can't enter without an appointment. Already exhausted from all this, Mujik sighs, asking if those people don't get tired of saying the same thing over and over. Out of patience, he orders the guards to move aside, since they were there on an official investigation, and the trio refuses the request. The MC pulls out the permission document in front of the man, saying that ignoring that paper means ignoring the very leader of the cult, his father. Upon hearing that, the brutes start trembling, and he adds that although they could disrespect the pair however they wanted, trying to stop them would be proof they don't respect the cult leader. From inside the room, a voice shouts for them to let the young master in. An older man greets them, welcoming them to his residence. He makes a pun about his staff taking work too seriously, saying they were ignorant, so that behavior was expected. So if this was the commander of the demonic army, Gu, Mujik could feel an absurd level of life energy emanating from the old man. His aura was so intense that just being near him made Daryong uncomfortable. The young man suggests that the guards must have too much free time since they were picking fights and says making them read a book or something wouldn't be a bad idea. To which Xuning replies with a saying about ignorance making men brave. But the young man stands firm, saying the concept is outdated and nowadays the clever ones are the ones who make the best strategies in practice. The old man nods in agreement, admitting that he's fallen behind with the times. Mook is very surprised at how peacefully Xiamei is behaving. After the barbs are exchanged, the commander asks why he was chosen as the investigator, and the young man says his father was just trying to punish him. That surprises the old master. Noticing his expression, the boy explains that he made a small mistake during a hunt, which makes Xining break into a disbelieving smile. That reaction leads him to ask if he was trying to guess why his own father had sent him as an investigator. He changes the focus, asking why the Nirvana Pavilion had started the investigation in the first place, suggesting the existence of another anonymous letter. The MC tries to keep the information secret, but Daryong is quicker and confirms that this was indeed the case. Realizing what his friend was about to say, he mentally curses himself for admitting the truth. The commander sighs, saying he knew that taking charge of an army filled with rude and criminal individuals would only bring him headaches, which was exhausting. Mujik states that they intend to finish the investigation as quickly as possible and hopes the long-haired man will help even if it's something inconvenient. He acts offended and asks what he means by inconvenient. Without further delay, the protagonist says that everyone knew the clever demon, the old man's brother, was hiding his older brother. And the commander nods but argues that he and his brother were independent people, and he had always thought of Mook as Wujin's rightful heir. That makes the hero smile, saying that hearing it makes him feel more confident, and that he hopes to count on Qianyang's cooperation in the coming days. Qianyang replies that he wishes the same and will order his men to prepare accommodations for the pair after the meeting. Before they can leave, the elder advises the young man to be careful, which freezes him. "I'm only looking after you because I worry," the man adds. But without any fear, Mujik asks if he was afraid he'd suffer the same fate as the previous investigator. But Qianyang smiles and denies it, saying that surely the leader of the cult didn't send his own son there to sleep forever. And he even assures that he'll keep an eye out whenever he can, and Mujik thanks him for the concern. With the matter closed, the two friends leave the room. As this happens, the commander's expression transforms into a dark scowl. Meanwhile, the MC smiles, thinking to himself that the reason his father sent him was for one of them to end up dead. Far from there, in Wujin's room, Meom is trying to convince him that this was a very serious matter and that he regrets not having gone in person to handle it. And he argues that the young master had told him earlier that they had strayed from the right path. Finishing his reasoning, Myung asks if that's why he sent his son to the wolves, because of a provocation between father and son. But Wujin is convinced that if one is going to go around talking big, that it's better to start acting in accordance with their words, leaving his friend and advisor surprised as it really seemed he had sent his son to get screwed. A raven hangs upside down, barely hanging on in the demon dragon's chamber, and the guards wonder what the hell that was. The guards murmur, and one of them says it's clearly someone with nothing better to do. Further away, Mujik and Daryon are the target of comments about being meddlers, regardless of whether they're investigators or not. And the young master notices that the men who stalked him at the entrance are the ones complaining the most. One of the men shouts at the pair that this has gone too far. The hero asks who that is, and the man yells, introducing himself as Ho Jiang, captain of the 3rd Division. Daryon recognizes him and says he has the best fighting ability among the commanders, which comes with a really bad temper. Mocking, the boy asks why the captain seems so stressed, and Jiang asks if he needs to spell it out for him. What were they doing placing something like that in a place where lots of people pass through? But Mujik explains that someone from the guard had thrown the creature into his bed, so he thought it wouldn't be a problem. And the man suggests that instead of doing something so unpleasant, he could have simply punished whoever did that to him. The tension between the two rises until the protagonist nods and says he'll start with a 3rd Division in that case. The statement confuses Jiang, who asks what he plans to start, and the boy answers, the investigation, of course. That irritates the commander even more. But before he can, Jiang says that not even with his authority could he do something like that to him. The two exchange looks filled with hatred and satisfaction before the boy states that he can, in fact, do that. The response is enough for the commander to stomp hard on the ground in front of him, creating a hole in the floor. Mujik says he understands and that he is free to lose his temper, but he shouldn't forget that he could be accused of treason if he stands in their way. All of Jiang's men gather to restrain him and ask him to calm down before he does something foolish. Tired of it all, the hero says he'll start the investigation right there with the angry one. And even out of his mind, the captain tells him to go ahead and get it over with. The three settle in a room, and the two could kill each other with their eyes if that were possible. Mujik breaks the silence and asks how long the man planned to keep up the little act. But Jiang has no idea what he's talking about. Loud and clear, the young man states that he is the one who sent the letter, which surprises Daryon. Captain Jiang really had sent the letter, but how had the young master discovered that information? The old man asks what makes him think he was really the sender of the letter. They exchange glances again, but this time the big guy gives in, looking at his hands while asking how he found out. Mujik says he got involved in the Raven incident even though he didn't have to, so he assumed his actions were meant to divert suspicion, and the man nods. He goes on saying he noticed that the members of the 3rd Battalion were more disciplined, and when the creature was hung up, only his subordinates stayed silent. Besides that, they even jumped in front of the captain, clearly worried. And that said a lot about the quality of his men. It was easy to tell from those actions that someone who leads a group like that probably wouldn't ignore corruption in their organization. But Mujik reveals that that wasn't the reason he figured it out. Remembering his friend's comment about Jiang's temper, it instantly reminded him of something from his past life. An incident where the strongest commander of the demonic army had been wiped out around the same time after sending an anonymous letter. Jiang didn't know if the letter would reach the right place, so he didn't write anything too specific, and he didn't expect the young man to be in charge of the investigation, which makes him ask what his reaction was upon finding out about his arrival. And being honest, he thought they were done for. Mujik sighs and turns to Daryon, asking if being frank had become popular for young people to be so honest. He apologizes before stating that the young master is the youngest in the room. Back to the main point, the MC asks what was really happening in that place. Jiang spills all the gossip, stating that Qianyang was using the guard for his own benefit, sending guards on delivery missions in exchange for money. The information shocks the pair. Mujik thought the old man might be accepting bribes from some local clan, but this was much more serious. The guys wouldn't accept unless they were paid very well. Daryon asks how that was even possible, and the hero says that most of the demonic guard was likely involved in it, especially the 1st Division. Jiang, surprised, asks how he could know that. And it was another result of his earlier observations. The 1st Division was the first to try to stop the pair from moving and to curse them upon seeing the Raven. The young man shifts the focus of the conversation and asks how the captain of the 3rd Division found out about the corruption. Just remembering it makes the old man look downcast. He explains that the person responsible for the previous investigator's elimination had committed self-annulment. He was his friend and had sent the first letter. Interested, Mujik asks how close the two of them were, and Jiang says they joined the cult together. It was like family to him. So the protagonist asks who the old man thinks killed his friend. The man confesses, "I suspect the Lord Commander gave the go-ahead and Captain Go of the 1st Division handled the rest." All that information made the MC think this was quite the scandal involving the Chief Guard Lord and the 1st Division, not to mention the annulment of the investigator. It was impossible to think his father or the chief strategist were completely unaware of it. They probably wanted to see if the young man could handle the situation against Qianyang, who was the commander of the guard. Sincerely, Mujik says that Jiang was a good friend, but he didn't understand how good the old brother had been. Definitely better than himself, who only watched as they did what they did to his friend. Mujik and Daryon give him empathetic looks, so the boy thanks Jang for his honesty and courage. At that moment, everything the man had been holding in his heart is released, and he cries, remembering everything he had gone through. Looking at the two of them, the young master felt a small hope of putting things back in place. Already outside the room, Daryon tells Mujik that he is quite different from the rumors he had heard about him and asks what kind of rumors those were. His new friend explains that there are some rumors saying he is not fit to become the celestial demon and that he's sorry. However, the hero looks at him and says it's all right because that could also be taken as a compliment, which leaves the investigator confused. He says that to him being considered fit to become the celestial demon is not a compliment, especially because he has no intention of ruling through fear and intimidation as the current leaders do. The boy turns to Daryon and asks if he doesn't agree that it's time for things to change around there, which greatly surprises the guy. It was past time for the cult to shed its old structure. Otherwise, the future would bring the extermination of his family and the sect itself. The next day, someone in the pavilion tells Mook that there's trouble and he needs to check it out immediately. The boy drops everything and runs to follow the guy in complete panic. When they arrive at the scene of the incident, they find Daryon covered in ketchup, along with another man in the same situation. However, the other guy's condition seemed much more serious than his friend's. Mujik shouts for everyone to stop and asks Daryon how badly he is hurt. But the man says he's fine, more worried about his colleague, who was indeed severely injured. AMC can tell that his ribs are broken and says they need to take him to a healer immediately. While the men carry the wounded away, the pair waits there, and Mujik turns and asks Dang if he was the one who did this, and he nods. The young master asks what the reason would be for injuring a Nirvana investigator, and the bald man says the guys bumped into his shoulder in the hallway and were about to leave without apologizing, so he simply taught them a lesson. But the boy is sure it was he who bumped into the pair and wouldn't have let them go even if they had apologized. Dang looks at him for a moment and then starts laughing, saying that was probably true. In the middle of his laughter, Mujik says, poison, which makes him stop laughing immediately, asking what he meant by that. Mujik states that his subordinates are all like poison to him, and the buff man asks what the boy is talking about. He tells the guy to confess, suggesting that he eliminated sect members like this last year, and 2 years before that, 3 more over a bar fight. All of his opponents were low-ranking warriors, and the Lord Commander covered it all up for him before things got out of hand. In response, Dang comments that there are many rebels in the world who don't revere the demonic army. Muck asks if he knows that he holds the authority to decide on an execution if he deems it necessary. The information surprises him, and the room falls silent for a second, with everyone seeming concerned. But Dang breaks the silence, laughing and asking what you would do with that authority, since he doesn't seem the butcher type. The young man's eyes shine. This was the poison he was talking about, the result of letting a fool become aware of how others see him. The bearded man should be nervous, but instead he's acting tough in front of his subordinates. It's as if he's only looking at his own navel to figure out what kind of act he's putting on. Mujik starts walking forward, which alerts the guards, and they draw their weapons, preparing for a possible attack. Dang smiles and says messing with them means messing with an entire army, making him wonder if the boy really has that kind of courage. Brave, he replies that at least he won't hide behind his subordinates. His opponent raises his arm to show that he's injured and should consider himself lucky. However, the young master is determined to defeat him and promises to use only his right hand if it means the fight will involve just the two of them. At that moment, realizing he's in trouble, Dang starts making excuses, saying he'll just cry to his daddy if he gets hurt there. In an attempt to soften his opponent, Mujik says he won't hold him responsible even if he perishes there, and Daryon becomes concerned about the price of that bet. With those conditioned, the bald man draws his blade and calls him to battle. Daryon informs his friend that Dang is ambidextrous, so he's just as good with his left hand as with his right, so that's why he was acting so confident. The protagonist then draws his sword with his left hand, pointing it at him as everyone watches intently. When the first sword strike comes, it's Dang who makes the move, but the hero dodges to the side and isn't hit. The force of the attack is enough to shatter the ground behind the MC, causing Daryon and even some of the guards to be hit by shards. Again, the bald man tries to strike Mujik, who spins in the air to escape the blade. No matter how or how often he tried, every blow was blocked or dodged by the young master. Upon landing, he charges forward, flips his sword, and slashes Dang's arm from bottom to top. The brute screams when he sees his condition and all that mess spreading. Not satisfied, the warrior even slaps him directly in the face, breaking his teeth with the hilt of his sword. When Dang hits the ground, all of his men prepare to attack Mujik, shouting that they need to protect their commander. Daryon calls out to his friend, but the enemy's approach doesn't intimidate him in the slightest, and he takes out 3 of them right away. Such a feat leaves everyone present stunned, and the young man breaks the silence by stating that the crime of those who just fell was treason. Dang, who until then was barely conscious on the ground, begs Mujik for his life. The young master looks at him with disdain and asks if he knows what happened to the families of the people he killed at the bar that night. And he already knows the answer. He knows it's obvious he doesn't know, even doubts Dang ever thought about it afterward. Those people lost a father, a son, and a husband, which makes him ask Dang if he really believed they could ever go back to having a normal life after that. Realizing this was the end, Dang begins to apologize, saying he was wrong. But Mujik tells him to shut up once and for all, finishing him with a stomp. At this point, everyone was horrified, except Daryong, who seemed more disgusted than anything else. Now at the peak of his rage, the young master asks who Dang thought he was to dare destroy members of his sect, even though he knew the answer would never come. Elsewhere, some women play instruments and dance while a man serves drinks. It's Xianying, who shares tea with Mujik to understand what happened between him and his men, even if it wasn't intentional. The old man explains that Dang was chosen due to a lack of options, and he agrees there were many questionable traits about him. Hearing that, the hero thinks about how much of a total scumbag the guy is. He was talking about his right-hand man, but instead of avenging him, he was turning him into a criminal. Although he was eliminated during an investigation, he was still one of the commanders of the demonic army, so making this a problem wouldn't benefit the MC. That's why the elder suggests they end the matter here. The loss of one commander and 3 subordinates was more than enough. Muck thanks him for his consideration and admits that he agrees with ending things on a good note, but there's one problem. A problem? The commander asks. And the young man explains that there's no evidence that he was there for an official investigation, since he has nothing to report to his superiors. But Qianying suggests he could just make something up. Mujik says that's not possible, because the letter sent this time mentioned external requests being accepted in exchange for money. That couldn't be covered up. The commander reflects for a moment before the young man breaks the silence, reaffirming that he would need solid evidence to close the investigation. Mujik can't take his eyes off the captain and soon explains that it should be him who provides the evidence to close the case. After the conversation, the boy surprises Daryong in his quarters, and he explains that he would like to check on his injured friend, and the guy says the physiotherapist is with him at the moment. The short guy even thanks him for sending someone to take care of his colleague, and his friend says he could not do it, even though he's just a temporary investigator. They were co-workers who had been working together. Daryong seems surprised, but their conversation is interrupted by someone saying it was good to see the protagonist again. It's the demonic physiotherapist, the most skilled healer in their sect. He doesn't treat just anyone, on the contrary, he only provides care to important members. The MC asks how the man is doing, and the old healer says that, fortunately, his life isn't in danger, but he'll need to recover before he can return to work. Seriously, Mujik states that those men were injured while doing the cult's work, so no effort should be spared, and the doctor tells him not to worry. Noticing the atmosphere around him, he sees the presence of the other men there, wondering why their faces look so happy. And indeed, they're all smiling at him. Then they start thanking him for the care. Not used to that, the boy clears his throat and says goodbye to the men there. Daryong follows him and asks what Xuning told him, and the MC says he wanted to end the investigation and pin Dango as the main corrupt one. The information shocks the man, who wonders how his most important subordinate had just died, and that's how he was acting. However, Mujik says he wasn't the most important subordinate, just the most exploited one, and surely someone else would soon fill that spot again. Trying to move past that issue, the investigator asks what the new plan is, and apparently the idea is to see what the captain does with the bait that was thrown. He doesn't understand what the young master means by bait, but the hero smirks and says he'll explain as soon as the old man bites. Daryong asks what he should do with his time for now, and Mook invites him to drink together. The invitation makes the guy thoughtful, but he soon relaxes his tense expression and says that the drinks that day would be on him, which makes the protagonist smile. Maybe he really had found a friend in the little guy. The next day, the demonic army had sent several documents for the investigators to analyze. They were records of execution requests and banknotes with high values, papers the guard claimed to have found at the house of the first corps commander. Apparently, they had taken the bait. Mujik wants Daryong to find out who the smartest person in the first corps is. He's sure someone intelligent was behind the forgery, and he explains that he will meet with Qianying once more to buy time to find that bastard. Already in his office, the young man announces that they received evidence directly from Captain Go's residence, and the commander says that's a relief, and now all that's left is to celebrate with a few drinks, saying he'll reserve the place where they drank before. However, Mujik cuts him short by saying there's still a small problem. That puts a scowl on the commander's face, who asks what it is this time. The issue was that the evidence came from the demonic army, when it should have been the investigators who found that proof themselves. Qianying asks if the source is really that relevant. The boy nods, since the chief advisor is no fool. If he found out where the evidence came from, he would suspect the investigation process and the results. That makes the commander think for a moment about what to do. So he asks the young master, who suggests he pretend to be working, like an extensive investigation for just one day, with the old man's authorization. Noticing the reluctance in the man's eyes, the MC says he doesn't like doing it either, but it's just a formality, so any document would do. Finally, Qianying agrees, saying he'll ask his subordinates to cooperate with whatever he needs. And that answer is enough to put a smile on the young master's face. He only wants the first documents used to contract the army and the wills left by those who went on dangerous missions. This is necessary so he can look at the handwriting and figure out who wrote the real records and the request forms. He decides to start with Gu Yang from the 1st Division, who asks why he's there, in a dark room, tied to a chair. And Mujik looks at the man, saying it's because he forged the assassination request records that were sent to them. The man lowers his head, claiming to have no idea what the master is talking about. Understanding, he says he knew he wasn't expecting him to say anything, and that he only obeyed the orders he received, but he needed him to be honest. Already sweating, Yang says he never did anything like that and never received any such order. Mook says he understands why he's acting like this because he's probably scared of what Xiuming might do to the guard. Yang stays silent for a second, and Mujik says he can return to his duties, which surprises him. But the hero explains that since he doesn't intend to answer his questions, he's of no help and he won't torture someone who's simply loyal to his superior. Yang doesn't move, and the young man adds, "But I hope you understand, Yang will let you go in one piece, but Xianyang will destroy you anyway." This last part makes the guard ask the dark-haired young man to explain what he meant by that. And he replies that the commander had probably already heard about his capture, so think about what would happen if they saw him come out without a single injury. I mean, it was only natural for them to think he had told everything he knew. Besides, Yang knew better than the outsider what his captain was capable of doing. Later, Daryong tells Muk that it was the army that ordered the elimination of Nirvana's investigators, with Dang being the main one responsible. The chief reflects on this, and his friend continues, stating that they wiped out a ton of people in the blink of an eye. Even so, it wasn't like the Lord Commander of the demonic army would accept his own arrest. But Mujik never planned for him to be arrested, of course not, which confuses the investigator. In fact, the young master's plan was to finish him off once and for all. The idea is so absurd that it makes Daryon jump in disbelief, and his friend explains that if Chunyang is arrested, his brother, the sword demon, will do something to stop it. He wouldn't just watch his own brother be executed, along with the countless forged pieces of evidence showing that no one had ordered Dang to commit those crimes. They would use a scapegoat until Mujik was defamed. But most importantly, he explains, is that if they let him live, many heads would roll. Even Jang and the warriors of the Third Corps who protected him, including Yundaryong, would be done for in that situation. However, if the commander perished in the process of his arrest, the situation would be different. All they had to do was legally prove his guilt. Daryong swallows hard and asks if his friend would be okay in that scenario since the sword demon would come after him. And the young man counters, saying not everyone seeks revenge when their loved ones pass on, and the old man isn't one to waste his life on revenge. Mujik stands up, prompting Daryong to ask where he was going this time. As if it were something routine, he replies that he was going to destroy the Lord Commander, which makes his partner ask if that was something he was really going to do right then. The young master continues walking until he meets Xionyang, stating that they had concluded the investigation thanks to his cooperation. To which he replies that he is happy and relieved, but the young man's departure made the old man a bit sad. Mujik says that when he becomes the successor, he will remember his goodwill, and the Lord says that he should be the one to thank him for that. All the young man thinks is that he really will never forget because the man lost too much during the investigation for him to forget everything. The young man asks that they toast to celebrate the end of the investigation, which makes Chuni happy. While serving him, Mujik directly asks why he did what he did, and the old man asks what he's talking about. Then the hero explains, with a fortune that guaranteed a life of luxury, what made you hire the demonic guard to receive even more money? Xianyang sets his cup down on the table and calmly says he should have asked the former captain of the 1st Division about that. But Mujik asks how a puppet would know anything, which makes the captain question what he's insinuating. The young man says he's curious about what he really thinks, raising an alert in the man. And he continues, saying he believes there's nothing in that darkness inside him except evil and greed. The words throw the commander off balance and he shatters his cup, asking if the boy had gone completely insane. But Mujik retorts, saying it was he who had gone insane by making requests he never should have made. Enraged, Jimiang destroys the table between them, shouting that he was already tired of the boy's little games. Still, the young man remains seated and impassive, enjoying his drink. Suddenly, the captain's gaze goes blank, and he wonders what's happening when he notices a sword in his chest. The young master finishes his drink calmly, using the 5th technique of the Sword of the Path to Heaven. It was a celestial strike capable of piercing the heavens, which leaves Xianyang even more confused. Mujik finally speaks, informing the captain that he was under arrest for misuse of the demonic army for personal gain and more than 20 eliminations, except that this wasn't an arrest, according to the now former commander, which makes the protagonist smile, explaining that he would be exterminated either way, so he asks him to do him a favor and pass on quickly. With that said, he removes the object from the corrupt man's body, causing his blood to spittle everywhere. His last words are, "I had no idea the young master had so much strength hidden inside him." With all the noise, the people in the pavilion run to the room, despairing at the sight of that terrible scene. However, before anyone can speak, Mujik announces that the Lord Commander met this fate only because he resisted arrest for his serious crimes, and he orders Daryon to arrest all members of the 1st Corps, as this case will now be officially investigated. His friend agrees promptly. Then Mook informs Jan that he will lead all guard pavilions to assist with the investigation and apprehension of the First Division. And he concludes by stating that he received approval from the Chiama to make decisions at that moment and therefore they should be carried out immediately. Jang accepts everything without hesitation, and the protagonist notices how his friend's expressions seem to have softened with the captain's passing. Mujik returns to his father's pavilion and walks toward him. There he finds his father, Sima Myung, and Gu Qianpa, the brother of the late Qianyang. And the young master's gaze is enough for the demon to understand that there was no good news regarding his brother's condition. Mook greets his father before greeting Qianpa, saying it had been a long time since they last saw each other. The demon agrees and says he would like to hear the boy's explanation about recent events. The young man explains that everything is written in this report so he can simply read it, but the elder insists, saying he would like to hear it from him personally. He thinks that since neither his father nor the advisor intervened in the situation, they probably wanted to see how he would handle it on his own. So he says that based on his investigation, they discovered his brother's serious crimes and that he tried to destroy him during the arrest process, apologizing for the ending. It made a lot of sense to Chimpa after all. If he committed a crime, then he should be punished. But there was something he couldn't understand. I mean, he could be somewhat pathetic, but he wouldn't be foolish enough to attack the boy in a situation where his crimes had already been exposed, which wasn't a lie. He would probably surrender without a fight and ask his brother for help, and Mujik had finished him precisely to prevent that. However, the hero states that he has no idea why he did it, supposing that the old man couldn't accept the fact that he was caught by someone much younger. Chiampa is insistent and says he saw his limp body before going to the palace, and it looked like his brother had been stabbed in the chest with a single blow. Apparently, no one realized how exceptional the boy's skills were, considering he managed to take down the mustache man's brother with a single strike. He looks to the side and says he has to give credit to his father for that. The Lord was furious, but he couldn't use all his strength on the Chiama's son. Chiampa gives a fake smile, saying he is grateful the boy is telling the truth, as he felt much relieved to hear it. Mook still pretends to feel very bad for having taken the light from his little brother. It was very strange. He wasn't showing him a sign of anger, even though he had taken down his disciple and now his brother. He should be furious. They exchange glances for a while until Wujin breaks the silence, suggesting that the demon try to rest while they prepare the funeral. The old man thanks him for the consideration and leaves the palace. As he passes by Mujik, the boy thinks that maybe the sword demon wants to tell his father that he went too far, that they didn't deserve to be treated that way. When the door closes, Myung praises the boy's work, stating that the evidence he gathered was enough to reach a conclusion in the case. But he worries if he was hurt anywhere, and the young master denies it and thanks them both for their concern. When Myung starts to make a comment, the boy questions him, causing the elder to change the subject and ask him to forget it. A man enters the room with a huge box, making Mujik curious. He soon explains that the cult leader gave it as a reward for his hard work. When they open the box, they see a very fancy-looking sword, and Mujik is surprised. Confirming the suspicion, Myung says that this was the black demonic sword. It was one of the sect's sacred swords alongside the white demonic sword. Mujik smiles and tells his father that if he wanted to give him a reward, he should have chosen the white sword, which suits his nature more. The comment makes Wujin take a deep breath and say that the black demonic sword suited him better. Mook draws the blade, saying that it seems his father knows very little about him. He pulls the blade from the sheath, surprised at how much cold it emitted even without infusing his own energy into the sword. His father looks at him with pride, and even Myung is surprised at how satisfied the man seems to see his son happy. However, the young man sheathes the blade, saying that, to be honest, it felt like that was too big of a reward. And the advisor says it was more than deserved, since the problem with the captain had been resolved. He admits he didn't expect the young man to handle it alone. He even questions if Wujin had foreseen such a good outcome. The Lord denies it, adding that he thought he'd be lucky if the boy survived the mission. But for Mujik, his father didn't really mean that. He was certain he only sent him there because he believed in him. His father knew that he had mastered the art of the ascending sword, and he also knew he had consumed the essence pill from the ascension corridors and believed he wouldn't be easily defeated. Though he doubted his father could have predicted Qianyang's downfall. Staring at the blade he received as a gift, he knew why it had been chosen. There was a blatant declaration to Chiampa, as if saying, "I approve of my son's actions, and don't you dare lay a hand on him." Mujik immediately clasps his hands in reverence, deeply thanking his father for giving him the blade as a reward, and he adds that the most important thing was the meaning behind the gesture. Wujin seems truly proud, but limits himself to dismissing his son. As he leaves the celestial demon's pavilion, someone calls his attention, inviting him to talk a bit before he goes. It was Chiampa, and the young man wasn't foolish enough to think he'd just leave so soon. As he approaches the old man, it's impossible to ignore his new sword, especially since Mujik makes sure to show the blade more clearly to him and says summer feels hotter than usual. With hatred, Chiampa shouts, asking how he dares to seek his brother and destroy him, saying he'll tear the boy apart and throw the pieces into his brother's grave. The young master is already drawing his blade when the old man melts into a friendly smile, and the demon asks if that wasn't the reaction he was expecting. Now it's the young man who shouts, cursing the old man and questioning how someone like him dares try to destroy order within the sect for personal desires. He even adds that if he dares to do anything to avenge his corrupt brother, he will slice his body and ensure no one can ever find him. Hyunpa fills with fear, and then Mujik does the same as the old man, saying that if he had said that, it's exactly how the young man would have responded. The guy can't hold it in and bursts into laughter, drawing everyone's attention around them. The laughter fades when the elder says that even so, he could have spared the old man a little. Mujik explains that he tried his best to end things peacefully, and his intention was to finish by having Chimiang resign from his post. But his brother had really crossed the line. In fact, it was like he didn't care about limits at all. Hyunpa nods, agreeing with the boy. The MC asks him if he knew about the corruption going on in the army and why he let all of it happen. The truth was his brother didn't listen to him, and he wasn't exactly a saint either. And he even confesses that upon hearing about his brother's death, he actually felt relieved. Relieved because there would be no one in his way to interfere anymore. It was almost unbelievable that the old man was being so honest about his relationship with his brother. They stay there in silence for a moment until Mook says he really understood how the old man feels. Seeing Chiampa's surprise at the statement, the boy explains that he would feel the same if he heard that his older brother had kicked the bucket, and he adds that he feel relieved not having to dirty his own hands to make it happen. To the mustached man, that confession was truly surprising. As they continue staring at each other, the boy wonders what Chiampa was looking for in his gaze. But the old man looks up and agrees with the MC that it really does seem like this year will be pretty hot. The old man gets up and celebrates not being the type to get weakened by the heat. At this point, Mujik had to admit he had no idea what was going on in the man's head. Even if he said he was relieved, he had still just lost his brother. The next one in line in that story could only be him. Or maybe he really was willing to let it all go, just like the clouds that travel long distances. Either way, Mook had no regrets. In his training area, the young man holds the new blade, analyzing what his first movements with it should be, as they were the most important. A sword communicates with its warrior, but a supreme sword like the Black Demonic Sword communicates on a much deeper level. Although a sword does not reject its warrior, if the connection doesn't go well, then the weapon's full potential won't be reached. Mujik smiles at his new toy, saying it was nice to meet her and that from now on he was her master. While training, he was determined to channel his vital energy into it, which happens easily, making him conclude that it was definitely unique, which pleased him greatly. He continues his training, surprised by the possibilities of the instrument. Raising the blade, he decides he will use that technique for a while. But over time, he intends to teach it phenomenal skills as soon as the focus stops being just keeping him alive. He spends most of his day on that activity until Leon brings some food. Since he seemed very focused, she thought it best not to disturb him. Returning to the kitchen. After a long time training, Mujik leaves the training area exhausted and is caught off guard by a crowd at the door. What were the sword demons doing there? And there was no way of knowing if Chiampa had sent them or if they just decided to show up. Well, regardless, all of them had fire in their eyes. And in silence, they are attacking the poor guy with dark energy collectively. In that scenario, taking in so much energy could destroy his organs. They keep releasing even more than before, and it's starting to get a bit heavy for the young man alone. What did they want, after all? To intimidate him until he locks himself inside his house forever. However, the MC remembers that now he could take advantage of the absorbed energy with the meridian strengthening technique. A hidden technique that involves several martial artists discharging energy into a person, reaching all parts of their body and strengthening their veins. And the more people are involved, the more effective the target's strength enhancement is. This was the perfect opportunity to boost his meridians. His aura keeps increasing as he makes his way through the demons, who are doing their absolute best to hurt him. At this point, the strengthening of his meridian had already reached the second stage. His face begins to look visibly tense, and he states that he can push it even further. They all continue releasing demonic energy toward him, trying to overload and harm him, which clearly isn't working. At that moment, he states he's going through the fourth and heading toward the final phase of strengthening, which is the fifth. He slowly opens his eyes, surprised to realize that there is no longer any malicious intent being released around him. In disbelief, the young man observes all the demons and notices that their expressions are all downcast. They look full of fear because they hadn't expected him to simply walk away. As soon as he positions himself in front of one of the men and stares at him, the burly guy is so scared he backs off, opening a path for Mujik. But he's not the only one. The other men begin forming a corridor for him to pass through. That moment makes the MC realize that they had understood he wasn't someone they could just trample over. So he begins advancing, walking through the group. It seems the sword demons had finally recognized his strength. He heads to the Celestial Demons Pavilion and admires the throne, startled when he's asked if he desires that. It was his father, wearing a serious expression, and the boy replies that he didn't want to be tied to that chair. With a short temper, Woojin asks if his son is there just to waste time again. He tells him to get up and sit already, which Mook does without further questions. As he sits on his father's throne, the Lord asks how he feels. He could see the entire pavilion from up there and admired a huge statue by his side. But he confesses that despite thinking he feels excitement, he felt nothing. And his father says he felt the same when his time came. Feeling nothing after taking down countless people, even his own brother, to reach the seat was something impossible for the boy to comprehend. Woojin breaks the silence, saying that the sword demons went looking for him on their own and that Chiampa hadn't asked them to. That surprises Muk, so he knew. And the boy confesses that he acted normal while enduring the energy they were throwing at him. But once he left that place, he started trembling. The Lord stares at him and asks if his son had been afraid of them. Mujik denies it and explains that he was afraid his judgment had been wrong. Like if someone had gotten agitated and tried to fight him, the boy could have died right then and there. And even if he survived, he wouldn't have been able to become the successor after annihilating the sword demons. And that's why he was scared, because there could be another moment where he'd have to make a decision with everything at stake. Muk confesses that, strangely, when he had those thoughts, he missed his father. It was a mystery. Why would he want to see his father among so many others? And the Lord continues, stating that a demonic human is not one who looks back. They look only forward. The protagonist is surprised because although it might seem strange, this was his father trying to console him. His father, of course, keeps his usual expression, and the son breaks the silence with a suggestion. He wanted to replace the intimidating statue in the main hall of the pavilion with a woman. More specifically, one of the famous 4 flowers of the Central Plains. They could place one in each corner to brighten up the place, but Muk realizes that was already too much for his old man, who stares at him seriously. He starts to get up, saying it was time to leave, since he was starting to ramble again as usual, and he asks the man to sit down. The young man walks away from his father, descending the steps, and then calls out to him looking back. With a somber expression, he asks if he is authorized to take down Chiampa. His father remains in complete silence upon hearing that, but then starts laughing, saying that even if he could kill the commander of the demonic army, he wouldn't stand a chance against Chiampa. Seriously, Muk asks why he created conflict between the two of them and says that he should take responsibility for it, which makes Woojin say that he will take responsibility. That's why he will allow him to become the leader of the Nirvana Pavilion, which surprises him. That was the inspector's office. The old man asks if something is wrong, since he said he thought the boy wanted to ensure discipline and order would be restored in the sect. Mujik wonders what that could mean, if he might be using him to handle matters he had delayed or something like that. Maybe he thinks he didn't care whether he lived or died in this duel between father and son. The young man decides it's better to stop trying to figure out his intentions and just focus on making decisions based on what he sees and hears. After all, Woojin is the type who would leave useful information on the walls for his children, but also use them for something dangerous to his advantage. So Muk tells his father that if he wants to throw him to the wolves, he could at least give him something to protect himself, and the man asks if there's something specific he wants. Thinking it over, the young man says he wants access to the Celestial Demon Archives, which surprises the Lord. The Celestial Demon Archive was a place where all kinds of rare manuscripts were kept. Only a small number of people were allowed in. The Chiama says that if he thinks he's going to learn some kind of supreme technique just by going there, he's very mistaken. The titles alone would be too much for him. And it was true. There were far too many secret and esoteric manuals in there. Even if he got lucky and found the best one, it would be on par with the Saring sword he already knows. Despite that, the boy smiles, saying he'd like to test his own luck. His father seems confused and says he doesn't know what kind of scheme or trap he's planning this time, which makes him break a sweat. Even so, the man assures him he'll allow him to enter the Celestial Demon Archives for 7 days. And the young master thanks him, looking satisfied. The archive is basically a gigantic, well-organized library. Mujik says he returned to the divine cult of the Celestial Demon to obtain the evil spirit he needed for the regression ritual. At that time, he was already more dead than alive, and since decades had passed since he left and his face was disfigured, no one recognized him. It took years for him to go from an ordinary warrior aspirant to holding a position where he could meet the new sect leader in private. That's when he heard about the 4 steps of the Wind God, the greatest mobility art consisting of just 4 movements. It was said to be a support technique for the Celestial Demon's martial arts, but at some point its knowledge was lost and no longer passed on. However, the person who obtained the 4 steps of the Wind God was said to be none other than Baekdo Ju, the sect leader at the time. Flashbacks of Baekdo saying he became the sect leader because he found the 4 steps of the Wind God, which were in the Celestial Demon Archives. Hearing that, Mujik asked why people thought the manual was lost if it was in the archives, to which the master replied that it wasn't kept on the shelves as it should be. Back to the present, the young master looks at the floor, noticing a book under one of the shelves. He lifts it with one arm and his mind flashes back to when he asked Baekdo where it would be, and the old man explains that the manual was kept as support for the 19th shelf. Now older, Mujik held that dusty book which had been there for so long it had left an imprint on the shelf. He begins flipping through the work, which starts with the phrase, 4 steps are enough to cross the entire world. The 4 steps consisted of 4 main forms: the step of shadows, the blink step, the piercing step, and the agility step. The first step was the shadow step, which was a movement used for infiltration. Initially, it was used to avoid being detected by a person, but as it evolved, it would be capable of disappearing even if several people were looking directly at you. The second was the blink step, used for defense against unavoidable attacks, and it allowed you to find a way to survive even if luck wasn't on your side. The third was the piercing step, which allowed you to advance against enemies close in and find any opening in your opponents. It was something that could neutralize any form of defense your enemies had. The last was the agility step, a mobility technique so fast that the word fast became an understatement. There in the archive, Mujik remained meditating on his knowledge for 7 days. After that time passed, the boy returned to the main pavilion and greeted his father, who watched him with curiosity and asked what he had learned in the archives. Proud, the young man said he learned a mobility art, and Wujin asked which one. And when he replied that he had learned the 4 steps of the wind god, the man was shaken. He quickly tried to strike his son, saying he wasn't in the mood for jokes and questioning how he learned a lost technique. But Mujik said he wouldn't have the courage to lie to him about something like that. The Lord stares at him again and, a bit skeptical, asked him to show what he learned. But the MC wanted to know what he'd gain if he did. The old man takes a deep breath and says that if he manages to prove himself, you will spare his life. Very well then. The protagonist begins to release his aura as he prepares to use the shadow step, and his father is surprised to see him. The ground beneath Muck begins to glow, and he opens his eyes wide to begin activating the first step, the shadow step. As he sees his feet starting to vanish, Wujin makes what is probably the most expressive face of his life. His son is performing a kind of dance around the room using the shadow step, with his lower half almost completely invisible. Moreover, at times it's as if his entire presence is erased. Seeing all that, his father asks where he learned the 4 steps of the wind, and the boy says it could only have been in the Celestial Demon archives. The long-haired man steps forward, claiming he wasn't fooling anyone with that blatant lie. And he justifies his indignation with the fact that the 4 steps of the wind god do not exist in the Celestial Demon archives. But Mujik says he definitely learned it there. He had no doubt about what he had seen and learned in the archives. The Chiyama is surprised by the boy's audacity and continuing with this lie. Challenging the man, the hero asks if he's sure if he searched the entire archive and suggests the manual might have been on the wrong shelf. And that response makes Wujin conclude that his son already knew it was in there. But he plays dumb, saying he didn't know and was trying to learn another technique and found it by chance. His father looks at him with eyes full of suspicion, but the protagonist tries not to show any sign of lying in his gaze. Giving in, he asks where it was, and the young man replies that it was being used as a support under the bottom of the shelf, and he found it while trying to fix it. His father lets out a sigh, saying he figured the MC had destroyed the most important parts of the text, and he asks how he knew that. To which his father justifies it by saying it's something he would have done in his place. Heading to his throne, Wujin stops and asks him to recite the steps. The request makes him smile, as it was what he imagined would happen. His goal wasn't to defeat his father and become the Chiyama. All he wanted was to take down Mugi to keep his father and all the cult members safe. And as soon as he settled that, he intended to travel the world and enjoy life before his father chose to abdicate as the celestial demon. So it wouldn't be a problem for him to teach the 4 steps of the wind god to his old man. However, he tells his father he won't fulfill the request so easily, which makes the man turn to face him. Muck tells him that nothing in this world comes for free. But the demon says that, as he remembers, the secret hunting technique he taught his son was free, and Mook says it was in exchange for the drink he had back then. The man can't believe how cunning he is and asks how he hid his shamelessness all this time. And the young man smiles, stating that he held back until he grew up. At this point, the bearded one just wants to know the price of the teachings. And without further ado, he replies, I wish to have the knowledge of the celestial demon's defense art. It was a series of self-protection techniques, a secret martial art that only the celestial demon could know. It was like gaining an extra life. But his father is direct in stating that it simply won't happen, since it can only be learned by the celestial demon and his successor. Insisting, Mujik says they could just keep the teaching a secret, which confuses the Chiyama. The boy explains that the art isn't something easily noticed when used, so if he teaches it to him in secret, no one would know. Hearing that, the man doesn't say a single word. After that tough discussion, the young master says he'll take his leave and asks his father to send someone if he changes his mind about the proposal. However, before he leaves the palace, Wujin says that in return the 4 steps must be taught first, and the acceptance surprises the boy. Now that they were talking about it, he asks if he'd like to learn immediately, and the response makes his father question if he trusted him that much, to the point of not fearing that he wouldn't honor the agreement after learning what he wanted. But Mujik denies it, stating that he's not someone who would do something so shameful in front of his own son. With the tension resolved, his father asks him to proceed and explain the steps. And so the training begins with the boy reciting the information he absorbed from the book. The two continue the lesson for quite a while, and in the end, Mook asks if he should repeat everything again. But Wujin says there's no need, and starts to disappear from where he was standing. The MC is surprised when he turns and sees his father using the first step, just as he had earlier, running around the hall. The boy recognizes his father's success, but it's clear he was doing it quite differently than he did. Could it be that he had some special interpretation of the verses or something like that? When the man returns to his original form, he realizes it really was a good martial art, At that moment, Mudrik had made his greatest change since his regression. Now, it was unlikely that Muji could defeat his father. As agreed, the Chiamna will teach him the defense art against celestial demons and warns that he'll say it only once, so he must memorize it well. And he nods, excited. His expression changes after the learning session, and he now has an injury on his forehead. Seeing that, Leon shouts in concern, cursing the person who did that to him, but the boy interrupts her and explains that he had to fight his father for it, which leaves her awkward from the comment. A flashback of the boy learning the defense art against celestial demons while sitting in lotus position plays in his mind. He celebrates having successfully mastered the technique and tells his father that now they share a secret and confesses he's happier about that than for having learned the technique. But the grumpy man smacks him on the forehead, telling him not to be so cheeky. Back to the present, Moondrik asks if An won't do anything about it, but she says she protects, not attacks. The comment makes him smile, as she never dared make such jokes in his past life. As he passes by, he calls for her, and when she looks up, he says he can't do this now, which confuses her. But he continues, saying he'll definitely fix the side effects of the body technique for her. She just needs to endure a little longer. Mudrik continues telling An that he told his father things need to change, so people don't have to sacrifice so much to protect others. So that the sect becomes a place where people like her don't have to do what they don't want to do. He smiles warmly at the woman, whose eyes begin to shine as she imagines this new reality, and she's just. The boy steps forward, asking Leon to pay very close attention to what he's about to say, and she nods. But nothing prepares her to hear, "I'm releasing you from all your duties effectively and immediately." This surprises her, and she asks if he's serious and if he's really dismissing her as his bodyguard. Muck even adds that from now on, she will be the captain of the Phantom Shadow Corps. The woman is confused by this because she had never heard of that group in the sect. He smiles, saying it's because he is still going to create it, which leaves her even more confused. How could he make her the captain of a group that doesn't even exist yet? The Gun Master rephrases the invitation and asks if she wants to become the captain of the Shadow Corps because of him. Then she brings her hands together in reverence and accepts his offer with honor. That night, Mudrik leans against the streets of the city, thinking that creating a new group wasn't as easy as he thought it would be. To run an organization, he would need a lot of money, and to get that, he would have to take advantage of an incident that happened before the regression. In the crowd, a man yells, introducing himself as Dang Yang, the one in charge of escorting someone important. It was a highly paid mission and also dangerous, so the men there would need to stay locked in. He warns that anyone who dares to do something stupid will be finished off by his own hands. He turns to Muck, saying he heard he joined the mission under Darion's recommendation, and the boy confirms. The man asks if he can count on his skills, and the MC responds mockingly, asking if he would recognize him if he cut him. He tells Mudrik not to be arrogant or he would lose his head before he could think of another answer like that. And the boy says he'll follow his orders well and behave as long as he gets paid. Even so, Dang says he'll keep an eye on him. The mission in question was to safely escort a mother and daughter to Nampion. And unlike before, the protagonist intended to ensure his survival during the journey. He waves to the little girl, who waves back at him. The mother also greets him with a nod as they enter the carriage. Without further delay, the guards begin the journey, protecting the carriage at all costs. As night falls, they settle in a forest area to spend the night before continuing the trip. Dang Yang hands out food to the soldiers and tells everyone to eat as much as they can, because they don't know when they'll have the chance to eat again. One of the guards is annoyed because it's just dried meat, but the others quickly tell him he just needs to eat it to avoid hunger and stay strong. Meanwhile, Mudrik observes the place as some mercenaries were ambushed by a mysterious group, and not even their bodies were found. When the stars are at their brightest, a loud sound can be heard, like someone coughing violently. The noise wakes Mudrik, who sees one of his companions vomiting something that definitely should have stayed inside him. However, he's not the only one. Everyone there was perishing the same way. The boy can only think of one thing: poisoning. After all, the only thing they all had in common was the meal they had upon arriving. Someone asked him how he was still alive. It was Dang Yang. He must have put the poison in the food he handed out. The MC says he didn't eat a single piece of that crap he gave the men. That's why he was still alive. The man draws his blade, saying it would have been better if he had died from the food instead of by his sword. It was shocking that the leader of the escort had poisoned the food. Bravely, the boy tells him his life is pathetic, and if he really intends to make money just by killing off his comrades forever. But the guy doesn't care, arguing that he could buy as much booze and women as he wanted after this mission. That makes Mook question whether he was really doing all this just for those things, but the man is already irritated and tells him to worry about his own life instead of his. A third person appears, stating that the job was already done. It was a man leading a group of masked individuals. Mudrik could feel they were a highly skilled team. Dang Yang celebrates his arrival, and the man shouts for the woman to come out of the carriage with her daughter before he sets everything on fire. Slowly, the woman opens the doors, stepping out with her daughter, who was very scared. He comments that they hid as well as rats, and that it was very hard to locate them. Crying, the woman begs Master Guan to spare her child's life at least. The man reflects before saying he will grant their request in consideration of old times. But his expression changes and he yells, asking if that's really what she expected to hear from him. And he adds, saying she should be begging on her knees instead of making requests like she's in a favorable position. The little girl cries, clinging to her mother, who also weeps. The woman begs him to spare the girl, offering 10 times the money he was supposed to receive. But Guan tells her to save her saliva because the girl's father had already been captured by them. The man looks at Mujuk, waving to the two with surprise and curiosity. Guan asks Dang Yang who he is, and Muk introduces himself as someone who was paid to take those two safely to their destination. The answer surprises him, and he asks if he wasn't one of Dang's subordinates, who explains that Mook was just some guy he hadn't dealt with yet. Upon hearing that, the commander urges his lackey to finish off the protagonist, prompting him to charge at the boy. Mujuk says they're no better than street thugs who would betray their own master, and asks if they really think they'll be paid. And he adds that they'll probably end up 6 feet under and penniless by the end of the mission. The insults hit Guan, who asks what the boy just called the group street thugs, to which he replies that if it weren't for the child, he'd bring the level of the conversation much lower. The leader of the group asks if the MC is crazy, wondering how some lowly thug dares speak to him like that. Still provoking, Moonjuk says he's only mad because he hit the mark. That was the last straw for the long-haired man, who orders his men to finish off the boy first. Then he points to Dang Yang and explains that the man said first, meaning the next would probably be him, surprising him. The henchman turns and asks his master if that was true. But before he can hear an answer, he's pierced through the neck by a blade and drops dead on the spot. From behind, Guan complains that the idiot couldn't even get that job done right, regretting having given such an important mission to a fool. Mujuk looks at Dang Yang lying on the ground, saying he had written his own tragedy before even getting out of bed that morning. The commander of the group yells for his men to attack the protagonist, no longer having any patience for his chatter. Seeing the group charging toward him, Mook asks the woman to cover her daughter's eyes and ears. She nods and does so, closing her own eyes as well. The hero gives a small smile and begins to emit his cold aura. It was time to apply the 4 steps of the Wind God, and the first would be the piercing one. Surprised, Guan wonders how the hero got in front of him so suddenly. And standing there, he managed to make all the henchmen's heads roll without the slightest effort. Seeing the scene, the man is terrified and asks who he is, but Muk retorts that it's him who should be asking that question to the old man. The woman screams, saying that was Guan, one of her family's vassals, who was supposed to protect her above all else. And she introduces herself, claiming to be Seiyan Jun, daughter of the Lord of the Golden Mansion. That's why Moonjuk hid his identity and joined as one of the swordsmen on the mission. Her father is Aso Jun, a renowned merchant and one of the richest men still alive. He was also the wealthiest man in Fusion and the master of the Golden Mansion. There was an incident where Asu was betrayed by his most trusted vassal and lost his life, and his daughter met the same fate. When Guan notices that Mook is deep in thought, he believes he has the chance to attack, drawing his blade. He slowly aims at the boy, but Mook doesn't even need to turn around to block the strike and finish the guy off. Looks like he's the one who lost his head. Seiyan is shocked by the scene, while the young master finishes the attack by telling his opponent that attacking from behind is a terrible habit. Now it was just the 3 of them, and the woman says she'd love to hire the hero, who replies that with the increased demand, his price had also gone up. But that wouldn't be a problem for her. After all, her family could pay whatever it took as long as it saved her father. The deal was sealed, and they continued toward the destination Guan was planning to take them. Upon seeing the carriage arrive, a bearded man celebrates the mission's success, stating that he had finally captured the 2 and was reaping the rewards of his plans. However, what he finds is quite different from what he expected, and he asks who that is with the girls and where his trusted lackey is. Calmly, Mook says that Guan was no longer among them, and only he had survived the attack. The news seems to shake the man a little, and he asks who managed to take down Guan. As cheeky as ever, the protagonist explains that it was a mysterious master who was young and very handsome. The man fumes, shouting how he could praise their enemy like that. But putting the pieces together, he comes to the conclusion that Mujuk was the one who eliminated him. The man's reasoning ability was truly surprising. Quickly, his opponent's army surrounds the trio, drawing their blades promptly. The villain says that if he had saved the woman and the child, he should have fled far away, and questions why he had returned straight to the tiger's den. However, the young man laughs and asks where exactly the tiger was, because all he saw were dogs that bit the hand that fed them. Seiyan seems frightened by the henchmen in attack position, and the group leader still didn't know what to make of the situation. I mean, the boy destroyed Guan, and instead of fleeing, came alone to the enemy's base, and he was confident, even when surrounded, so he couldn't be just anyone. Because of that, he respectfully joins his hands, asking who he is and inviting him for a drink, even though they had met under such circumstances. But the boy wasn't going to fall for that good guy act and says the old man can curse and insult him as much as he wants. It becomes clear that flattery wasn't the right move, so the opponent shouts, ordering his men to finish off the hero once and for all. They all run toward him, but the boy is already skilled enough to advance quickly and slice through his enemies. They realize the MC is very fast, so they were basically defeated from the start. Muk continues fighting bravely, applying the knowledge of the 4 steps of the Wind God. Saiyan still covers her daughter's eyes, and the fat man is terrified because now he realized they messed with the wrong person. Standing over the bodies of all his men, the guy asks about the true identity of the Great Master. But the boy is very modest, stating he's not anyone special, just a swordsman hired for a good amount of money. The fat man says that if the problem was money, he could name a price that would satisfy him. And Mook smiles, asking if he really had that much money in his coffers. To which the coward says he had enough to change a man's life, just needed to say how much he wanted. But the young man asks why he would do that when he already has money, and that if he wants to change his life, he shouldn't do it by stealing from his own master. The guy starts biting his lip nervously, but someone breaks the tense atmosphere by yelling at Muk to drop the sword. There was another rough-looking henchman, holding Asu hostage. The scene makes Saiyan scream for her father's life. The tension leaves the first henchman's body, who smiles and repeats his friend's line about dropping the sword or else the Lord was doomed. However, Muk lifts his blade upward, which confuses everyone with the movement. Then a shockwave follows the path of the sword, tearing through the ground until it reaches the man holding Asu hostage. Since nothing happens immediately, everyone goes back to being confused about the situation. What they didn't know is that the young master was using the 4th form of the ascending sword art, the Flaming Heavens. The fat man starts shouting, and Mook looks at him again, asking if he was sure about what he had said earlier. Seeing the boy walking toward him, the man steps back, completely terrified, begging him to wait. But it was too late for negotiations, and Mujuk tells the man to come in with everything he's got if he wants to live. The enemy sweats nervously, but thinks that since he used such a powerful sword aura, he must be nearly out of energy. He draws his sword, determined to land the first strike, and end the boy once and for all. However, to his surprise, the MC easily blocks his blow. Even so, it's enough to make his hands sweat red from the grip. The fat man says he'll gather all of his energy and end it now, receiving another block from the opponent's sword. He tries again, this time striking the ground beneath him. The two continue in a heated clash, but still without any decisive strikes from either side. At a certain moment, the fat man grows more confident, thinking Mujuk really was losing his energy. After all, he was too busy blocking his attacks. All he needed to do was keep pressing a little longer to beat him. But of course, he was wrong to think that, as he feels a sharp pain in his chest. It was the young master's blade piercing through him. The boy calls him pathetic, and even says he should have spent his life training instead of giving in to his greed, and adds that for a chief bodyguard who was supposed to protect the Golden Mansion, that was an unforgivable sin of betrayal. Finally, the boy pulls out the blade, making the man's guts spill out, and suggests that he be a merchant in his next life, since he had such affection for money. With the matter resolved, Asu thanks the protagonist. He says he will never forget his help and that he saved his entire family from ruin, and asks his name. Still within the new narrative, Muk introduces himself as just a passing swordsman, which makes Azu laugh, saying that not even the king of travelers could defeat his men so easily, which flatters the young man. Saiyan interrupts the conversation, informing her father that she had promised the boy a monetary reward. To which her father responds by saying she did a great job and that's a promise they can keep. And he tells the boy that if he needed money, he had come to the right place. Muk smiles, since that was exactly the reason he did this in the first place. Inside the mansion, the old man explains that since he saved their lives, they should give him everything they have, but that would be very difficult to do in reality. And the boy also says he would never dare ask for so much from them. Asu says that although it would be good to determine an exact amount to give him, the young man could simply take as many coins as he could carry. The offer even scares the hero. The only condition was that he couldn't use any carts or ask for help from others, but of course he could use his own internal energy. Uncertain, Muk explains that he might be able to take more than the old man expected under those circumstances. But the master explains that if it weren't for him, his family would be crossing over at that very moment, and it was only right to reward him accordingly. The protagonist is happy that his hard work paid off and thanks the man for his generosity. Asu slowly opens the gate to his vault, and the boy enters promptly while he and his family watch from outside. The one comments that with his level of martial arts, he'll be able to carry much more than one would think, asking if her father was sure about this choice. And the bearded man asks if there's anything in there that could be more valuable than the protection they received today. Sweetly, he adds, just having you and Yang safe is already enough for me, my daughter, which moves her deeply. The two comment that the hero is not just anyone, and the young woman says he's hiding his true strength, but was exceptionally skilled despite being so young. However, her father didn't just notice his abilities, but also the indescribable aura the boy carried. He had met countless people by now, but had never met someone so young, calm, and with such a unique presence around him. Money was something that could always be recovered, but they might never again be able to build a connection with someone like him in their lives. And that's why the old man didn't care how much Muk would take. The more he takes, the deeper the bond they'll create. The father's words seemed to truly touch Saiyan's heart. Back at the Heavenly Demon Pavilion, the young master had already sold all the treasures he obtained at the mansion. There was too much for a single shop to buy, so he went to different stores and markets to exchange the items for coins and bills. and this little game generated a total of 38 million in currency, which was enough to start and manage his organization. He enters his father's throne room, who as usual is at Myung's side, who comments on the reports used to make important decisions for the sect. Decisions that determine who lies and who doesn't. Sometimes Muk wondered if that was a life that truly made his old man happy, or if, just like him, Woojin was forced to fulfill a role he didn't want. His father speaks first, commenting that he knew about his departure, and the boy confirms, explaining that he went to get some money for himself, which was very unusual to see. While it's not like he could live off daddy's money forever, right? He explains that he'll need a lot of funding from now on and gets questioned. Then the young man reveals that he intends to create his own faction, which surprises both Woojin and Myung. When they ask what he meant by that, Mook says that each of the supreme demons had one, and to deal with them, he'd also need his own. But his father says that can't happen. If he creates a faction, his brother will want one too, and their family and the cultists will become divided, and he forbids it. The comment doesn't surprise him. It's not like the protagonist expected his approval right away. Then Muk pulls something from his cloak, saying it's for his father and Myung, who become curious about the gift. He takes the package and opens it, immediately asking what all that money was for. And Mujik responds that it would be Woojin's allowance, who becomes alert at those words. While the son smiles, Myung seems to grow more nervous by the second, and his father even more so. But calmly, the old man explains that he already has plenty of money, and the boy nods, saying he knew he was like the richest man under the sun. However, he explains the amount he gave was his first allowance as his son, to thank him for giving him life and raising him. It's hard to say what his father is thinking, but Mook states that he just wanted to do this at least once and wishes the old man a great afternoon. Mook slowly walks away, leaving the palace, and it's possible to see a faint smile on Woojin's face, surprising Myung. At the Nirvana Pavilion, Mook and Leon talk in the corridors. Something catches the woman's attention. It's Daryong, announcing that the time had come. He follows with a bow to Mujik and says that everyone was waiting for him. The protagonist is happy to see his friend there, which was a surprise. The boy explains that he volunteered, and Mook says he bet he didn't expect they'd meet again like this, and the old partner agrees. Still, both seem very pleased with the situation. The young master says it's time to go, starts walking out, and Leon turns to follow him as well. Without her noticing, Daryong stares at her with a love-struck expression as the group leaves the building. As they open the pavilion doors, the entire inspector squad is gathered, looking at the trio, especially at Mujik. The men quickly salute, congratulating and greeting the new master of the pavilion. All that warmth makes the boy smile. They were being friendlier than he thought they would be, which makes him ask Daryong if he told them their salaries would be cut if they didn't welcome him properly, which the boy denies. With no other guesses, Mook asks why the atmosphere is so pleasant, and the young one explains it's because of what he showed the inspectors. So it was because of the commander's investigation. When one of them got hurt, he ensured a good doctor and even destroyed Go Dang as a bonus. Noticing his friend lost in thought, Daryong asks him to please say something to the squad. The hero looks outside, thinking about what to say to all those men. Then he says, "Look, you might not know if you'll be happier or more miserable now that I'm the master of this pavilion," and continues the speech. "But I'm sure of one thing, your hearts are beating much faster than they used to." His friend is surprised by the boy's improvised speech, and the inspectors seem to be processing the new master's words. Then the entire group celebrates, shaking the palace with joy. The atmosphere was so good until Mook actually received a job. In his new office, Daryong explains that this was the document regarding the unfairly handled incident and that he had requested to see it himself. Exhausted, the master asks if it had anything to do with Chiampa again, to which his friend replies that he didn't want to bring it up, but it was something that happened recently and matched his request. Leon says the sword demon was already about to explode last time and Mujik needs to stay in control. But he argues that the stories written there were unfair and impossible to cover up because he was going to explode, and asks her to read and cover what she can. Taking a brief look at the document, she sighs and says the chief will definitely have to do something about it. Meanwhile, at the entertainment pavilion, a man slams his hand on the table and lets out a long sigh. A guy approaches and tells him to stop drinking. He knew he was in a tough situation, but the man was completely drunk now. The man asks how he's supposed to stop drinking if the bastard who put his son to sleep for 10 days was acquitted as if he were innocent. But the gentleman is surprised and asks what he's talking about because he heard the Nirvana Pavilion was investigating the case. The drunk takes another shot, explaining that the Nirvana Pavilion investigator said his son was training with a friend and got hurt. The bar owner asks how he could do that, and the father says he heard that the child's father, the one who led the attack on his son, was the Demon of 100 Swords. The Demon of 100 Swords was a subordinate of Chinompa and the leader of hundreds of other demons. That information seems new to the young man. And the other continues, saying that the Nirvana Pavilion investigator is the same type. No, actually, he was far worse. His companion tells him to lower his voice, saying he doesn't want anyone to hear him say that, but the drunk doesn't care what they do to him. Trying to advise him, the bar owner says that in times like this, he needs to stay strong. But the father cries and says that if his son doesn't wake up, his wife won't be able to live either. And if that happens, he'll have to take justice into his own hands. A third person asks if he really thinks he can kill him, and they turn around, surprised to see a group of men. The father asks who they are, but instead of an answer, one of the guys asks why he's going around saying he's going to kill someone else's precious son. He realizes that was the guy who put his son to sleep and tells him to give his life back, since they hadn't heard a single apology from him. The boy tilts his head, saying he's very sorry for committing such a heinous crime, that it will never happen again, surprising the father. And as he stands up, he asks if that's good enough, saying he can't say he never apologized now. The man is very surprised, while the boy's friends look smug about the scene. Full of hatred, the man grits his teeth, calling him a bastard while pulling out his sword. But since he's not a real warrior, the boy steps in with his fist raised, hitting him straight in the nose, sending him flying across the room. He says everyone saw it and that he pulled his sword first, and his friends say yes, that they're his witnesses. The young man begins to smash the guy's face, asking how a mere warehouse guard dares to report him to the Nirvana Pavilion, and that it was all his son's fault because they asked him to steal money from home, but he said he wouldn't do it since his father worked hard for it. Still beating him, the boy says that idiot had acted kindly and made him look like human trash, which is why he was so full of rage. To everyone's surprise, the man speaks up, stating that the boy had just confessed, and he freezes. When he asks what he's talking about, the man says everyone heard the reason why he beat his son. It wasn't training. He was the one who attacked him. However, the boy looks around the room, intimidating those present, and asks if anyone heard him say that. Everyone turns away, simply ignoring it and remaining silent as if they weren't even there. He seems satisfied and smirks before telling the warehouse guard that no one heard his confession. The young man starts laughing loudly, and the man cries and screams in frustration. The boy comments on how he looked like his son, crying like that, and even his friends laugh out loud at the scene. However, someone speaks up, saying they heard it, which makes the trio turn around. It was Mujuk, who slowly enters the room with his companions. The bully turns, asking who the hell said that, and faces Muck, who asks how he dares to speak so rudely without even knowing who he's talking to, like a spoiled child. His friends seem nervous about the young master's presence. The boy apologizes, saying he's being too emotional and hopes the MC isn't angry. But his mask falls when he asks if he really thought he would say that. And even without knowing him, he concludes that Mook wasn't afraid of danger to walk in there like that. Muck smiles, saying that if just being the son of the demon of 100 swords allowed him to act like a tyrant in public, it meant his father was powerful around there. The teenager asks if he's really trying to belittle him just for being only his son. When the man who was getting beaten understands what's happening, he asks if that was the second young master. Everyone is surprised and wonders what the second young master is doing in a place like that. Realizing he's in trouble, the boy stammers while confirming that it really is the second young master. But Muck tells them to relax and says he's there today as the master of the Nirvana Pavilion, which makes Leon ask if that wouldn't make him even angrier, and the friend plays dumb. The thug apologizes for not recognizing him, saying it seems he committed great disrespect because Mook looks so young, begging him for forgiveness. And Mujuk replies, commenting that considering his bad behavior, he doesn't seem that young. But the boy says he's still very ignorant. He was very cunning. He knew exactly when he needed to bow down to someone. Upon hearing that he and his friends were going to leave, young master asks him to wait because they had matters to resolve, which makes the boy break out in a cold sweat, asking what he meant by that. And the protagonist replies that he was there to investigate the assault incidents committed by him. He retorts nervously, saying the pavilion had already judged him as innocent, which was true, but as the new master of the pavilion, he would reopen the entire investigation. And he begins listing crimes committed by the boy, such as habitual extortion, inciting theft, and even assault to the end, which classifies him as a murderer. Oh, and he had even gone after the victim's father to beat him up too. Mook states that the crimes he committed are very heinous, and he'll need to stay in prison for at least 20 years to be properly punished. That amount of time scares the criminal, who tries to justify himself, saying it wasn't an assault and they were just training. But the hero asks if he had already forgotten his public confession moments earlier, and he, the master of the Nirvana Pavilion, had heard everything, every little bit. Furious, the kid says his father won't stand by and let someone accuse him like that. And Mook tells him not to worry, his father will be far too busy to take care of him. After all, he'll also be arrested for conspiring with an investigator of the Nirvana Pavilion. The boy has a lot of nerve and yells in the master's face, asking if he thinks his father will let him off after getting arrested. And he declares that his father will definitely seek revenge against the dark-haired boy. He might even try to massacre him while he's in prison. Out of patience, the hero punches the boy straight in the stomach. The blow makes his eyes tear up and snot drip from his nose before he hits the ground hard. Mujuk asks if he knows that just by threatening the master of the Nirvana Pavilion, his sentence had increased to 30 years. He looks up crying, begging him for forgiveness. Firm in his decision, the master asks him to forget about his father and give him one reason why he should be forgiven. The boy begins thinking about it, half desperate. Insistent, the protagonist asks if he has ever trained with someone before or helped someone do something. What he wanted to know was the kindest thing he had ever done, promising to listen even if it sounded exaggerated or made up. Still crying, the boy realizes that Mujuk is right. He hasn't done a single good thing in his life. So the MC says that he can't even make something up, so why should he be forgiven? Trying to save himself, the boy says he'll be nice from now on. But Mook slaps him across the face, knocking him to the ground, and says he can live that way once he's out of prison. His friends say they were only following orders and beg to be allowed to leave. However, Mook says that if they don't tell him everything they know, they'll definitely become scapegoats for the boy, so they promise to tell him anything he asks. With that, he tells Daryong to take them to the pavilion, and the inspector nods, asking his men to take them away. The warehouse guard is in disbelief at everything that had happened in such a short time, and Mook says that if anything happens again, please report it to the Nirvana Pavilion. As long as he's the master, no external influence will work on him. Everyone is surprised that someone is finally starting to take a stand and bring justice there. The young master finishes by saying that if anyone dares to call their father here like that brat did to intimidate others, he'll call his father too. People watch in astonishment before the room fills with laughter. Not mocking laughter, a laughter of relief. Leon comments to the guard that the demonic doctor examined his son before they came here under the second young master's orders. The information leaves him a bit confused, and he asks if it was really true that someone so important examined his son. To which Mook smiles warmly, saying that his son is even more important, and he saw him wake up before going to the bar, so he should go see him now too. His eyes immediately fill with respect and admiration, and he begins to cry tears of joy. He bows right away, thanking the MC for all the kindness he has shown so far. And Mook says that he has dedicated his whole life to their cults, so it's only natural that he protects someone like him. The warehouse guard raises his hands, grabbing the boy's hands, and thanks him from the bottom of his heart. Leon and Daryong watch the scene, happy with the outcome of the raid, and even the bar owner is sweating a little from his eyes. Finally, Mook smiles warmly, saying that actually, he's the one who should be thanking him on behalf of the cult. He returns to the Nirvana Pavilion and his squad looks at him seriously. He thought the first to show opposition would be one of the sword demons, but surprisingly, it came from within the pavilion. It was one of the special investigators, the eldest one named Gok Myung, who apologizes for not seeking him out in his office, saying there were too many people. Mook asks why they all came to see him, and he says he heard the master had indeed reopened an investigation that had already been concluded, which he confirms. And the group confesses they are worried that by doing so, he will crush the morale and authority the investigators hold. The young man looks around, asking the rest if they agree, and they say yes in unison. However, he says no, in fact, he believed that the past incident severely damaged the authority of their pavilion. Gok Myung asks what he meant by that, and he asks if they had heard how Yang Ho confessed his crimes to everyone else when he was arrested. And the old man nods, which makes Mook question what he was doing there then. Gok insists that what they're talking about now is the reopening of a closed investigation, and Mook asks if this was a matter of principle or what. The bearded man says yes, adding that it had never happened before. The master calls him out, arguing that an innocent child was beaten to death and they obtained a confession from the actual culprit. He asks him if that doesn't justify a new investigation and how he thought it looked trying to defend his principles at that moment. With a serious look, the old man says it might seem old-fashioned, but upholding principles in an organization is truly important. The leader sighs in disbelief and says he wants to hear what each of them thinks, asking that those who believe reopening the investigation is right to come to his side. Everyone looks around nervously and only one person steps forward. It was Daryong, saying he believes it is necessary. Moonjuk asks him why, and the friend says the investigation was not satisfactory, and adds that they also couldn't deny the possibility that external influence had been involved. At the end of his colleague's statement, the young master asks if anyone else would like to share their thoughts. A tall, gray-haired man agrees. He introduces himself as Ik Ho, the man who had been beaten during the investigation, and says he hadn't been able to thank him before and is very grateful for his help. The others still seem worried while the two briefly talk about the state of the young man's injuries. Mook looks at them, specifically calling for investigator Zhang Hua, who steps forward. Since he was the investigator in charge of that incident, it was important to know what he thought, but all he says is that he investigated thoroughly. The protagonist thinks for a second and asks if he received any bribes. The man panics at the question, and Gok asks how he could insinuate such a thing. Angry, the young man begins to release his aura and tells the old man to stop speaking without his permission. The entire squad appears extremely tense, and he repeats the question to Zhang Hua, asking if he received money from the demon of the 100 swords. He swears on his life that he didn't, and even says that if the young man doesn't believe him, he can investigate him. Mook smiles, saying he already did, and he truly didn't take any money, but the investigator's expression remains tense. Everyone is surprised, and Gok asks if the master conducted an internal investigation on the investigators, explaining that it was not allowed. But the young man had done so under direct orders from the cult leader, and those words give the old man chills. Bluntly, the young man asks why he covered up the investigation if he didn't take any money. And Zhang Hua says he didn't cover it up of his own will, which makes Mook ask if he was threatened with his sister's safety. And he even states that based on the results of the investigation about him, he was so incorruptible that it was hard to find someone like him. Since he hadn't believed the results, the MC investigated him personally because he didn't believe anyone in the world would refuse money. However, surprisingly, he was just as incorruptible as the report had said. Zhang Hua is surprised by the statement, and Mook asks why someone so clean would do such a poor job investigating and covering up something like that. That's when he discovered his great weakness, his sister, his only family member. Gok asks if the friend had really been threatened, and he remains silent, which makes the old man shout for him to answer. At this point, Mujik understood why the bearded man had taken the lead and gathered everyone there. Zhang Hua is a subordinate Gok truly cares about. The old man only showed up to ensure his record remained untarnished. The master tells the young man not to worry about his sister, explaining that he already sent warriors to protect her until the incident is over. They seem surprised, and Zhang Hua asks if he's being serious. The protagonist nods, which brings tears to the investigator's eyes. Soon he says he committed a grave offense, falling to his knees to Gok's surprise. The hero says he shouldn't have done that even if he was threatened. And the man knew that and states he will accept his punishment willingly. The other inspectors look at him with concern for their companion, but Muk tells him to get up and states that if this had happened after he became the pavilion master, he would not have forgiven him. But since it happened before he arrived, he'll make an exception for the subordinate. The surprise is so great that the man asks if he's really forgiving him, to which Mujik confirms but asks him to remember that it was he who forgave him and his history of honesty was the reason why. However, that life no longer exists due to this incident, and his master wants him to start over and become incorruptible once again. Zhang Hua starts crying even more and thanks him repeatedly as the others watch. Muk then shouts, telling them to listen to what he's about to say. Now that I am the master of the pavilion, I see your families as my family, which meant that if anyone dared mess with their family, he would crush them personally. And he decrees that from now on, he will not allow his pavilion to be influenced by external forces. In return, he promises that he will not let anyone go unpunished for messing with them, and if they ever receive a threat and tell him, he will protect their family. Mujik asks if he doesn't seem trustworthy enough and states that if the answer is no, then they should trust the leader of their sect. The young man says that even if he has to beg his father for help, he will do it. So if anyone dares to influence them from the outside, they must report it. And he adds that he will make sure the squad can always do their work with their heads held high. Satisfied with the speech, the young master smiles warmly at his new subordinates. Our boy says that the Nirvana Pavilion will function as it should, once everyone's family is safe. No matter who it is, the boy believes that if someone has the courage to commit a crime, then they should be punished. Even if it's a member of his own squad, he makes it clear that he will not let it slide. And he even says that if his father, the cult leader, commits a crime, he will also hold him accountable. That last sentence shocks the group. Mujik declares that he does not fear the cult leader or the supreme demons. His only fear is that the Nirvana Pavilion will become useless, like if they're not able to protect the ones they're supposed to protect, while those who should be punished go free, smiling without them being able to stop it. In the middle of the speech, one of the subordinates speaks up, drawing the other's attention. I know it's late to say this, but I want to follow our master. It was a woman who Daryong introduces as Jo Hyang. She walks forward, leaving her colleagues curious about her intentions and actions. And finally, she positions herself beside Daryong and Mujik. The others also step forward and all position themselves behind the young master, all except Gokmyeon, who looks at them in disbelief. Unarmed, Mook states that if he really wants to turn his ideals into reality, he'll need his experience and assistance, and he extends his hand asking the old man to help him with that. Gok thinks for a moment, staring at the boy, but this time, he accepts the handshake and thanks him for the invitation. The two seal the agreement with a somewhat shaky, but genuine handshake. Then the protagonist orders Daryong to go with the pavilion's warriors to arrest the demon of the 100 swords, Yang Tai, Yang-Go's father. Upon hearing that, Gok argues that the demon would not surrender. After all, he had the 100 sword demons with him. And the young man says to ask him to come however he wants, because if he doesn't, he will be accused of staging a rebellion. At the meeting with Yang Tai, the old man greets Mujik, calling him second young master, to which he responds by asking to be addressed as the master of the Nirvana Pavilion, which seems to irritate the man even more. Even so, he corrects himself and comments that in his summons, there was an accusation of insubordination, asking what that meant. And the young man justifies that he wrote it in the summons because he thought it would be the only way to see him. Yang Tai agrees and apologizes for not complying with the arrest immediately, but the MC understood that the man had to show pride in front of his subordinates. Upon hearing his explanation, the young man nods in understanding and explains that initially this case shouldn't have escalated so much since everything happened while the children were just playing with each other, which could happen. The statement makes the demon smile, saying he knew Muk would understand, and soon he would need external help and money to keep running the pavilion. At this point, the protagonist had already realized he was being strung along, but the fact that the man wanted to bribe him was surprising. Yang Tai adds that if he wanted to become his father's official successor, he would definitely need his help, because now everyone supported his brother. That's why Mook says he would be very grateful if he helped him. The man says he already expected the young man to be truly magnanimous and would make sure to serve him from now on. Standing up, he adds that he intends to throw a great banquet for him soon. The old man's attitude makes Mook ask where he was going, which leaves the man confused since he thought the conversation was already over. So the boy asks if, when he said he would help him, he didn't mean only after he got out of prison. Yang Ta seems confused by this, telling him to stop joking about that kind of thing. But the MC asks if he looks like he's joking. After all, they were talking about him threatening to make an investigator's family member disappear. And the muscular man replies, claiming he was sure he had already said he never made any threat. Crossing his arms, Mudrik says he couldn't care less about what he said because he received a testimony from the investigator who was threatened. And the rules of his cult dictate that the testimonies of its warriors carry more weight than those of others to protect the investigator's authority. It's understandable that the demon didn't know about that clause since the master himself had only recently discovered it, but he makes it clear that it was because of people like him. Just like Yang Tae, there were many others who thought they could get out of these situations just by talking. Mook states that if he confesses now, his sentence would be reduced by 10 years. However, if he doesn't, he'll get a 20-year sentence, no negotiation. Hearing all that makes the demon ask if the pavilion master had completely lost his mind. And the young man says that if he needs to be crazy, so be it. After all, to deal with people like the old man, he had to let go of sanity a little. Still, he would give him a few minutes to think about the offer, and the man asks what exactly the boy is doing this for. The MC repeats his question and begins, "Your son almost beat his own friend to death, and it wasn't just a fight. He spent years bullying the boy. And after that, he threatened to finish off a member of an investigator's family to cover up his son's crime, and he still didn't know why this was happening." Shouting, the man asks how a storage guard could be compared to them when they were superior. The pavilion had always turned a blind eye to those things. Mook looks at him indifferently and says those are disturbing and frightening words, which confuses Yang Ta, and the hero states that things were changing around here. Sweet and cold, the demon of the 100 swords argues that the supreme demon won't sit still in the face of this injustice. But Mujik says he won't do anything. Why would he do something for him if he did nothing when the boy struck down the commander of the demon army? The old man slams the table, splitting it in half, and calls for the pavilion master's attention. However, the boy mocks him, asking if he intended to threaten his family too. Impossible, since his father was the leader of the sect. He gets up and warns that the man has a few minutes and advises him to confess his crimes. From outside the room they were in, Yang Tae's hateful screams could be heard, and Mook thinks that maybe the reason the demon cult fell wasn't Olmuji. A mere 100-sword demon already dared to threaten the family of an investigator from his pavilion. The cult's order had fallen to the point that he even dared to threaten the pavilion master. So was the downfall really only because of Mugi? The young man arrives at the courtyard and is surprised by what he finds. It was Chiampa, drinking in the middle of the courtyard. Mook stands there staring at him, and the old man raises his cup in the air, toasting him before beginning to drink. The man finally greets Mujik and asks if he prefers to be called Second Young Master or Master of the Nirvana Pavilion. The young man stares at the demon in silence for a long time. Then Chiampa invites him for a drink, and so he does. As he sits down, the old man asks if he hadn't warned him that nothing good ever comes from these frequent meetings. And Mook retorts, saying it's him who keeps seeking him out. The comment causes the two to stare at each other intensely. The tension is so thick that the guy has to take a sip of his drink before continuing the conversation. Then he comments that he sensed something new about the boy, and when he made a request to the sect leader after winning the fight, something lit up in his mind. He says that if someone is smart, they really should make that kind of wish. And Mujik agrees that he made a great wish. Grabbing the bottle, Chiampa says it all started that day. He pours a drink for the protagonist, saying that he made his blade start crying, which leaves him very confused, asking how it could be crying just because of him. And he suggests that it was more likely lamenting, and the old man asks what he meant by that. Then Mook says that his disciple used the energy-dissolving poison on him during their fight, and his other disciple came to meet him and humiliated his subordinate. On top of that, his brother used the demon army for personal gain, and his subordinate threatened to destroy an investigator's family from the Nirvana Pavilion. With all that happening, it was obvious his blade would cry. It lamented that those around him didn't uphold their principles. Chiampa smirks ironically, saying the boy certainly has a way with words. Still, he was very mistaken, and the hero asks him to explain why. So Chiampa begins, "First, you say that those around me don't match my standards, but they are the perfect people for me," explaining that they represented exactly what he represented. His response leaves Mook speechless. I mean, the old man was truly crazy. It was easier to deal with him when he was full of pride and chasing fame. Without further delay, Chiampa tells him to release the demon of the 100 swords, with the justification that his people's morale had fallen to a very low level because of the young master. However, the boy stands firm in his decision and says he'll release him if he's found innocent after the investigation. The answer makes the old man furious, causing him to release his fire aura enveloping Majik, who looks extremely tense. Chiampa's demonic energy was on a completely different level. Now he understood why Woojin had said it wasn't the right time yet. Snapping the young man out of his thoughts, his opponent offers him a piece of advice, but the boy interrupts him, asking him to stop with that, which surprises the man. Tired, he tells him that if he's there to ask for a favor, he should just do it. He definitely doesn't need to give advice while doing so. Shiampa grits his teeth before releasing the boy from his destructive aura. A bit begrudgingly, he mutters, "You're right, it's rare for someone to speak so directly to me." To which Mook responds that he better stay on guard, since stagnant water is bound to rot. But his enemy says no one stays stagnant because they want to. After spending some time in the water, they start to enjoy it and miss the chance to get out. And the young man replies that's exactly why he shouldn't place himself in rotten waters, and advises him to take this chance to get out of the dirty water, since Yang Tao was not someone worthy of his protection. The man takes another sip before asking if the MC would accept a drink from him, extending the cup. Muck thinks for a moment before responding, but accepts, allowing the old man to pour him a drink. He concludes that he'll follow his advice about getting out of the dirty water, which the boy considers a very wise decision. However, the condition for doing so is that Mujik becomes his water. What was he saying? What did he mean by becoming his water? Then Chiampa tells the young master to drink that liquor if he truly intends to become the celestial demon, stating that he would become his supporter. All of that surprises him. He had never thought the man would say something like that. Everyone knew he supported his brother, and now he wanted to abandon him. That's why he asks, "I thought you were already supporting my brother." And the demon explains that it's because he had no idea the boy was this insane back then. He was definitely out of his mind. He would truly sell himself for his ambitions. The MC had harmed many of his allies, and even so, the old man wanted to be his supporter. Muck tells him directly that he was the one responsible for his brother's downfall. Even so, Chiampa doesn't seem disturbed, shrugging his shoulders, and explains, "Once we leave our parents' embrace, we're strangers. You expect me to suffer because a relative of mine is gone? I think you're suffering more than I am." He continues his argument. "It's not like I'd officially decided to work with your brother, and even if I had, I could always change my mind." Muck asks if, with his support, he'd also have an entire army by his side, but still didn't understand why he was choosing him now. Chiampa replies that upon seeing his madness and courage, he thought he could bet his fate on the boy. The boy asks if he chose him because he was crazy, which makes the old man laugh before confirming, saying he intended to devour his madness completely. Mujik seemed to be starting to understand him for a moment, and thinks that if he were younger, he might have believed his words just because he was inflating his ego. But he knew the dirty little games the old men played to manipulate the younger ones. He had asked if the protagonist intended to become the celestial demon, as if that would be achieved simply by working with him. The young man lowers his cup and says he's thankful the demon thinks so highly of him, and that it's time for him to do what was entrusted to him. Chiampa stares at the boy's cup before being hit by his question. "What do you think my father would say about this?" And he suggests that he would accuse him of avoiding hard work and playing politics when he'd been given such an important role. But the old man asks what he thinks would happen if he did well in the role of master of the Nirvana Pavilion, arguing that if the sect leader intended to keep him as the pavilion master, Mujik would just rot there forever. There was only one path, and that was to choose whether or not to become the sect's heir. Chiampa still says that the cult leader would probably pay even more attention to him if they worked together, because just being chosen would make him more visible. He wasn't exactly wrong, but there was something he'd forgotten. The desire to set the hierarchy of the sect right wasn't just his, but also his father's. Muck asks for some time so he can think about the proposal and promises he'll drink that same liquor when he knows his answer. Satisfied, Chiampa nods, saying that's a normal thing to do. He picks up his blade and warns that if the hero drinks like a fool just because the man told him to, things wouldn't work out. The man's sword is very heavy, and he swings it with all of his strength toward the boy's throat, who blocks the blow with his blade. Chiampa says he'll be waiting for the answer tomorrow, but Mujik states that he'll give it in 5 days. Eyes full of rage, the man gives him 3 days, leaping away before doing something he might regret. The young master sheathes his blade and alone mutters about how much the old man's attack hurt like hell. At another moment in the Nirvana Pavilion courtyard, Mujik's squad warriors train like madmen with logs on their backs. Commanding the training is Jang Ho shouts, asking if they're going to give up so early, especially during a normal training session for the Demon Guard. He asks if they thought they could complete their missions in that state, ordering them to endure it, and says that their wives, children, friends, or anyone else might betray them, but the sweat they shed now definitely won't. Darion laughs as he comments to Muck that he knew Jang Ho wasn't married, so it was funny he mentioned a wife and kids, and his friend agrees, laughing softly. He changes the subject, asking how his colleague managed to pull it off, and the young master asks what he's talking about. The guy refers to the apology statement published by the Southern Blade House. He couldn't believe they actually admitted their mistake. It was unheard of. But Muck says that if he's so curious, he could go ask them himself, and Darion scolds him, saying that if he went there now, he'd come back without his legs, but Muck denies it, saying that even if he danced on their turf, he'd return in one piece. That leaves the guy confused, but Mujik's thoughts shift back to Chiampa, who was still waiting for his answer. Changing the subject, he draws attention to the matter of Yang Ta and his son. and orders that they be sent to a prison where contact with them would be very difficult since they had to be punished for what they did. His friend nods in understanding and Mook continues walking. If he hadn't interfered, the pair would have continued brutalizing others for the rest of their lives while Guak-Su and his family, the victims, will have lived in misery. Because of people like Yang Tae, there were other victims of his actions that the MC didn't know about, and more victims would continue to appear. But he was willing to stop these people from causing more harm. At night in the demon village, some people stopped to observe the Nirvana Pavilion sign being placed in front of a building. Muck explains that this was an extension of the pavilion where people could report abuses of power by warriors of their sex. The citizens stare at him, somewhat confused and in disbelief at what he's saying. Noticing the silence, the young man asks what they usually do when their warriors abuse their authority around there. And a mustached old man wonders out loud, what do we do? The answer leads Mudrik to conclude that the population probably just accepted the abuse and stayed quiet, even those who knew they should report it. After all, even before reaching the Nirvana Pavilion, they had to declare the reason for their visit at the main gate, identify themselves, and undergo a body search. And that didn't happen just once. They had to go through the same procedures millions of times before actually reaching the pavilion. So the young master asks that for any matters related to the warriors of their cult, please report them to this branch from now on. The citizens are surprised, asking if he really means that, to which he nods and hopes they'll spread the word so that everyone knows they can always report to this branch if they suffer any injustice. And he asks them not to worry about any retaliation because anyone who initiates retaliation against a Nirvana Pavilion investigation will be executed. The mustache man is surprised, realizing that the second young master is really doing this for them. So he bows in respect, saying he'll make sure everyone hears about his actions, which makes Mook smirk slightly. He reflects on how, with the Nirvana Pavilion at the center, they'll be able to protect villagers, low-ranking warriors, and those who suffer injustice for being weak. The clan would be teaching everyone an important principle by doing this, that everyone's life there holds the same value, and that's how they would move forward. The young man walks to his house and upon entering his courtyard, notices Chiumpa leaning on his sword, just like the other day. Seeing him, the old man asks if he's ready to drink the liquor he offered. Muck sits down, nodding affirmatively. Then Chiumpa picks up his liquor bottle and pours the liquid into the boy's cup. Still, the tension is high between the two, who keep staring at each other constantly. After finishing pouring, the demon asks him to drink. However, Mook looks him in the eyes and says he'd need a little snack first. Chiumpa seems impatient, but still asks what kind of snack the boy wanted. And Mudrik states that he would need the demon army, which makes the old man's eyes widen. Trying to clarify, the young man says, please put the demon army in my mouth. The deafening silence settles as Chiumpa thinks about what he just heard. When he finally speaks, he calls the boy's attention to explain that the world doesn't work that way. Mocking, he asks if it's not normal to eat something while drinking. The demon puts his hands on his face, saying he waited 3 days for the protagonist, and fills with rage upon realizing that even so, the boy had the nerve to propose such an absurd condition. He lifts his sword from the ground, telling him to forget the deal, and that he would cut off his head and take it to the Celestial Demon Pavilion himself. As the old man swings his blade, Muck raises his own, deflecting it. The strike sends Mudrik sliding backward and his hand begins to buzz, which makes the old man say that it wasn't bad at all, since he really made good use of his internal energy in the block. Now he understood that it wouldn't be so easy to take his head off. Again, he tries to hit him with his massive blade, but doesn't succeed. Instead, the hero turns, anticipating it, begins to raise his sword, and blocks while starting to release his own aura. The two are evenly matched, each emanating their own energy. The clash continues, and it's clear it's going to be really difficult to get out of this. A small shockwave, followed by a strong tremor, destroys part of the pavilion roof. That was just the result of the collision of the two swords, which also destroyed the floor beneath them. Chiumpa manages to push Mudrik back again with one of his strikes, but the old man realizes that the young man was truly strong when he notices his own hand trembling from the attacks. He grits his teeth upon realizing the boy had managed to make a small crack in his blade and comments that it was quite interesting. Returning to emanate his red fire aura, Chiumpa seems truly furious. Mudrik looks at the scene, sweating nervously and grinding his teeth, while thinking that he wants to try using the 4 steps of the Wind God to fight him. He was very curious to know if he'd be able to stop the Step of Annihilation. However, assessing the situation, he concludes that he still can't use it. He had time on his side and wouldn't risk losing due to not having enough internal energy. From afar, the young man shouts, "Please, give me the demon army." And his words seem to provoke the old man's anger even more, who asks who he planned to appoint as commander, since he himself was busy as master of the Nirvana Pavilion. Mudrik states that he would like to appoint Jang Ho, the 3rd main commander, but Chiumpa asks if Jang wasn't on his side, saying that all that greed would be his downfall soon enough. He says it was the old man who wanted to use madness to devour everything and had also suggested they work together, and the path of madmen could never be normal. That surprises the demon, who asks what the hell he meant by madmen. And the boy insists, asking if he was wrong and acknowledging that he, of all people, must be insane to want to work alongside him. Muk doesn't know the final destination of his ambitions, since last time it was with a god before the old man could show them to the world. Surprisingly, he had been the first among the supreme demons to fall into eternal slumber. But why would someone so wild and scrupulous be the first? Back to the fight, Chiampa stares at his opponent, grinding his teeth before cursing him, and states that his greed had ruined all negotiations, kicking the liquor bottle away. The old man leaps high into the sky, leaving the young man completely alone. Muk smirks slightly, because he knew the old man would be unable to reject his offer. After all, he knew better than anyone that the boy had another 7 Supremes he could go work with. 2 days later, Jang Ho is in shock, asking what the hell had happened. In Mudrik's office, he tells him that Chiampa had invited him to become the commander of the demon army, and asks if he was behind it. Apparently, his judgment was correct. The man was intelligent and observant enough to come and ask that question. So the MC nods. The man thanks him for the consideration, but says he doesn't deserve the position. But the master says there's no need for his friend to be so humble. That was the position of someone who had been eliminated by his own hands, and asks him to lead the demon army as he did with the 3rd Corps. And if he does that, he'll definitely become the best commander they've ever had. Jang Ho looks super scared and says the young man really overestimates him, which is still a possibility. But considering that other candidates would still be recommended, it was good to see how Jang would develop. Defeated, the man accepts the young man's request, who only thinks about keeping the new commander busy enough to become official, even though he said it was to see how things would unfold. At another moment, Mudrik sweats nervously at the image in front of him. It was his father wearing a floral robe while staring at him seriously. They don't exchange a single word, and the tension in the room grows with each second. When he finally decides to say something, the hero asks if that's a new robe or something. But Woojin denies it, saying it's his pajamas, and the awkward silence dominates the space again. His father asks what he's doing there so late at night. But the boy asks what he means by late at night, since it was still early afternoon, and questions his father about his habit of sleeping early, warning him that if the leader of the Myron Alliance finds out, they'll attack while he sleeps. But Woojin is already impatient. Cutting off the babble, Mook explains that he intends to use the Demon of the Bloodied Heavens as one of his swords. His father sighs, asking if he hadn't said he wanted to take him down just the other day. But the young man had realized it would be a waste to destroy the old man, and the bearded one stares at him in silence. That wasn't new information to the celestial demon. When Yang Ta recommended Jang Ho, he had already figured they would end up working together. Still, his father warns that the guy wasn't someone Mujik could easily tame into being his sword. But the MC explains that he has no intention of taming him, only using him until he breaks, stating that he's still not valuable enough to be part of his collection. Woojin asks what he'll do if a guy attacks him, and the boy says he'd love to see him try, because there was something different between the two. After all, he's already old, and if he breaks once, that'll be his end. Unlike the young, who grows stronger the more they fight. Even with all of his son's arguments, the celestial demon doubts his ability to put everything into practice and asks why he was sharing all of that. And he explains that he was receiving his salary from him, so it was expected that he report what he was doing. But the man questions whether he was sure he wasn't just there to ask him to accept Jang Ho's recommendation. With a smile, he denies it, saying it's the opposite, and he asks that he not accept the recommendation under any circumstances. That makes his father curious. How come he wanted him to reject someone he himself had recommended? So Mook explains that his plan was to use the opportunity to show the old man his place, since he acted as if he were superior to everyone, even Woojin. The answer leaves the mustached man thoughtful for a brief moment, until he recaps what his son said, questioning if he was really giving up the demonic army and telling him to stop wasting time. The boy expected this reaction, but says that's exactly it, and he had something to gain with Chiampa, something that would only be guaranteed if things didn't go his way. And that thing is more important than the demonic army? His father asks. He explains that in a way, yes, but that he would still take control of the army, all of it. Woojin stares at him seriously before turning his back, telling him to stop being ridiculous, which makes Mook smile since there was nothing more ridiculous in the situation than his father's little outfit. At the Celestial Demon's palace, Woojin was hearing about how, even though things were slipping out of his control, Mook had stood out within the sect lately. He looks at Chiampa and questions whether that wasn't happening because of him. But the old man denies it, stating that it was all because of Mook himself, and that he had only recently realized the boy's aptitude. Still, Woojin is convinced that Mujik was still very immature, and the word makes Chiampa reflect before saying that was the reason for his visit to the palace. He would like to take him to even greater heights, and the leader replies that it would be a great opportunity if he truly wanted to help, and that he could do so. The old man thanks him for the authorization, and taking advantage of the fact that he was giving permission to help, he asks for a little push, but Woojin asks what exactly he means by that. Chiampa explains that he wanted his permission to personally select who would be the new commander of the demonic army. The request reminds him of his son's words, who had been quite firm in not agreeing with the other demon's recommendation. So he explains that it would be difficult to allow, and the man tries to argue, justifying that his son also wanted that. Feigning sincerity, Woojin says it was clear he had already done a lot for his second son, and it was time to consider the feelings of his firstborn. Hyampa begins a sermon about what he had learned raising his disciples. And the main thing was that if they were going to support someone, they had to choose only one person. He was heavily criticized for that in the past. But honestly, the celestial demon couldn't care less about his life lessons. Unlike him, who had such a generous heart, he had no problem crushing the first person who dared say something against him. Although Chiampa seemed irritated by the interruption, he remained silent, which makes Wujin question if there was still anything else he wanted to discuss. The old man denies it, bowing and stating that he will see him again before leaving. He leaves furious, not understanding why the man wasn't supporting him 100%. If he had already chosen to back him, he should go all the way with it. When night falls, he meets Muck for a drink and says that the cult leaders seem to care more about his brother than about him. Staring at him, the MC asks if he really believed that. He says that it feels like all their combined efforts were for nothing, and if he was losing to his brother, then he should have made up for what was lacking. The statement irritates Chiampa, and he asks, "Are you saying I'm not good enough?" But the boy just explains that he was a bit disappointed with the situation. The old man puts his cup aside and explains that it was impossible to make Jang Ho the army commander in the first place. And before he continues, the protagonist interrupts, wanting to know if his partner had already given up for good. Pouring another drink, he explains that there was no point insisting on something he already knew wouldn't work. Hearing this, Mudrik teases him, questioning if the old man had been acting all tough all this time, even though he was incapable of doing that one thing for him. His words hit the man straight in the heart. What did he mean by that one thing? And acting like he was tough, get real. But the boy said he was the one who offered to support him, and the other retorted, saying the MC was the one who chased after him like a child for something impossible. Mak has a lot of nerve to say that, in that case, he should have refused his proposal right away and not recommended Jang Ho as commander the next day. He draws his blade, marking a line on the ground between the two. Starting an analysis, he says that earlier he mentioned that this was what the sect leader thought of him. So he trusted him and stood on the line. But drawing another line, he suggests that one was a better representation of Chiampa's relationship with Wujin. The old man watches the kid's reasoning, who stares at him with an air of superiority. It was a win. He clearly had nothing more to say about it. And the boy adds, "If I were you, I would have made it happen, regardless of the circumstances." Staring at him with hate, Chiampa suggests he tried, since that was the case. But the boy doesn't understand what he means by that. And the old man explains, "Didn't you mock me, saying I'm incapable of doing this little thing? Then you must be able to do it without much effort." Muck asks what he would gain if his father accepted the request, but Chiampa is sure the spell would backfire on the caster in this case. He had no doubt that his father would reject him, just like he did Chiampa. He definitely knew Wujin like the back of his hand. So the young man asks if this was a bet, which surprises the old man. Even so, he accepts. The condition was that if the MC failed, he would go to his side without complaint and stop asking him for things, making the young man ask what would happen if he won. Chiampa can't think of an answer immediately, and the two stare at each other. Then he says he would give him whatever he wanted, and Mook says he wants an elixir made by the demon, one better than the essence of the demonic pill, which is absurd to the man who rants about how hard it would be to find an elixir like that. But that's exactly why the hero suggested it. He had a reason to ask for the elixir, a rare elixir that would give him more energy than the essence of the demonic pill, and he knew the old man had the divine pill with him. And he argues that if he couldn't make Jang Ho commander nor get an elixir for him, then there was no reason for them to work together. Chiampa finally gives in, stating that if the boy could make whoever he wanted the commander, he would get his elixir. Muck draws his sword, saying that this was a promise. The two clashed swords, signaling that this was a mutual agreement before walking away. It was perfect. If he consumed the divine pill in addition to the essence of the demonic pill he had already taken, he wouldn't lose to any supreme demon in terms of energy. And he already knew how to make sure he'd win the bet. So he asks Myung, his father's advisor, the likelihood of Jang Ho becoming the commander of the demonic army, and asks that he be 100% honest with him about it. The advisor sighs deeply before responding, and upon thinking says it was less than 10%, and the boy says he heard Chiampa had recommended him. But the man explains that Wujin rejected the proposal and says he knew him well enough to know he wouldn't change his mind without a very good reason, which in fact he knew very well. And he suggests what would happen if another supreme demon also recommended Jang Ho. The suggestion leaves the advisor thoughtful. Mudrik is more than sure of his plan, and he already had someone in mind. That night, Myung continues working, looking at his book, but clearly thinking about something else. His conversation with Muck. Two supreme demons recommending the same person. That had never happened before. And if it really did happen, there would be a great chance of Jang Ho becoming commander, which would justify the change in plans. But he questions the boy if that could really be done. To which he replies that he'd at least tried. Sometimes it was easier to deal with two tigers than with just one. His final sentence was what left him the most thoughtful. He couldn't help but wonder if the other tiger he referred to as the Supreme of the Sword. Far from there, Ba Jongtak, a member of the Northern Sky Sword clan, asks what they meant by violence. He was sitting in Mudrik's office and stated that the servant was incriminating him, asking for a chance to confront her. But the young master asks why he thought she would try to incriminate him. And the man responds that he couldn't know for sure, but suggested that someone might have told her to do it, or maybe he had offended her, but he hadn't done anything. Mook stares at him, agreeing that the two should meet. He calls for Daryong, who enters the room with a small girl. Immediately, Ba Jong-tak stands up and shouts, asking if she was the one responsible for all that. However, he's reprimanded by Muk, who warns that if he dares to shout again, the conversation will end right there. Looking at the little girl, he asks if that was really the man who had done that to her, and even intimidated, she nods her head. Again, the accused shouts, "How dare you lie?" And look at her. She's trembling. She's afraid of being caught in a lie. The protagonist explains that she was like that because she was scared, which offends Bo Jong-tak, who asks if he was taking the girl's side. To which he replies that he heard the man had told her he would go after her family if she tried to expose him. The statement leaves him speechless, and he asks if his superior really believed what the girl was saying, which makes him look at Daryon for a moment. Two more women enter the room. The man looks shocked to see them, while the young man confirms that he must remember them, as they had all been his servants in the past. Stammering, he confirms, commenting on how they had grown. The two stare at him with expressions of discontent. But Mujik tells him to stop pretending to be a nice guy because both of them had already testified. The guy's modus operandi was always the same, as was the way he treated the girls, using them for 3 years until he found someone to replace them. Looking down, Ba Jong-tak justifies that it was just a mistake he made when he was drunk, asking for forgiveness. And he even claims that none of the others who touched their servants ever went to jail before. Apparently, he had done his research thoroughly, according to Muk, who agrees with the man's words. He swears he would never do anything like that again and could even write vows promising it if the MC wanted. But the dark-haired boy says there was no need to go that far because he wouldn't send him to jail. That statement surprises the girls present in a bad way. The man thanks him profusely, beginning a promise. However, before he finishes the sentence, he ends up losing his head with Mujik, and the hero says he would be sent to a place worse than jail. The girls' expressions change, shocked by what they had just seen. Same for Daryon, though he was less shaken. Finally, the protagonist confirms that the man who tortured them was done, and their families would no longer be in any danger. And he asked them to live their lives without further worries, but they were still horrified. And he explains that they would probably never forget what the man had done to them, so it was better they remembered that scene than other things. He hoped the moment when he paid for the crimes he committed would be more impactful than what he did to them, and that they would remember the last look on his face. That was the best he could do for them. The servant who seemed oldest speaks up, thanking him for helping them get the revenge they had long awaited. Meanwhile, the eyes of the younger ones filled with tears, but it didn't take long for them to thank him as well. Seeing the scene didn't make him feel happier, and he remained serious like Daryon. And he asked them not to thank him, since he was only able to punish Ba Jong-tak thanks to the courage of the 3 of them in testifying against him. It was all because of them, and he asked them to continue living bravely, to which they nod. With the matter closed, Daryong escorts the 3 girls out of the building. The situation makes Muk think of his father, of how he would be brought down by the orthodox martial artists he hated so much if they continued following the premise of survival of the fittest. That could not happen. Therefore, without a doubt, his father needed to be cut down. His thoughts are interrupted when Leon bursts into the office shouting his name. She says that Ba Jong-tak served the Northern Divine Swordsman, and the Supreme of the Flowered Sword wouldn't let his elimination go unpunished, asking if he wasn't afraid. And he was. He was afraid of dying before managing to fix all that rot. The one who comments that since his official appointment as Pavilion Master, the sect had been improving, to the point that they now had more good people than the Mirim Alliance. But he thought that not touching servants wasn't something to be celebrated, it was just how things should have always been, even if it didn't happen naturally. The boy's words leave her speechless, and he orders her to notify the Supreme of the Sword immediately, and to say that there was an incident in the investigation that he would explain personally. Far from there, in the Northern Sky Sword clan, Daryong and Mujik were being guided by one of the locals. Upon arriving at the palace, the protagonist was introduced as the Pavilion Master of Nirvana to the Superior. He was received by the Supreme Demoness of the Flowered Sword, So Yanrang, that although she appeared to be in her 20s, she was twice that age, which fueled a rumor within that sect. Something about her never changing, no matter how much the world around her changed. In fact, she only seemed to grow younger with each passing year. Mujik bows to her, saying it had been a long time since they last met, but she asks him not to call her Madam, and suggests he refer to her as the Supreme of the Sword, which the boy says is impossible considering the woman's seniority. And she asks if he respects her just because of her age, saying she doesn't think that's how it should work. Respect should only be given to those who deserve it, arguing that even if someone is younger, that person should be respected if they deserve it. In the end, the boy yields, asking her to also address him more casually, and she agrees. Muk introduces Daryong as the investigator in charge of the recent case, justifying his presence in case any details of the investigation needed to be explained. However, she states that there is no need for that, and if the Nirvana Pavilion had decided a crime had been committed, then that must be the case. Furthermore, the woman agreed that a man like that deserved his fate, so her house would not seek conflict over it. Mujuk looks at his friend, who understands the message and leaves the room immediately. With his exit, the Supreme tells her old acquaintance that thanks to his hard work, several changes have reached her own cult, and she thanks him for that. Humble, he says it was only possible thanks to the great support of a woman. But she says there's no need to praise an old crown like her so much. And the boy quickly scolds her, stating that she looked like she was in the prime of her 20s, which was absurd to her, as she had already stepped away from duties to focus solely on understanding martial arts. She had lived a very different life in her last regression. After Huamuji brought down Wujin and closed his sect, all the supreme and martial masters fought to assume leadership. In the end, the first to become sect leader was the Supreme of the Flowered Sword. During that period, there was always a war going on. It would have been better if the woman had been good at politics, but ruling wasn't among her ambitions, so she was overthrown after a 4-year reign. Returning to their conversation, Mook confesses that he was in a complicated position when the incident happened. When asked about it, he says she had probably already heard he was having many conflicts with the Southern Sword House. He mentioned the house on purpose to see her reaction, since their leaders had the worst relationship among the Supremes, and their subordinates were like cats and dogs. The protagonist explains that it was because Chiampa had been pressuring him a lot before, but now he had a conflict with Yanrang's house. Upon hearing that, her first reaction was to say she was completely different from the Sword Demon, and the boy completely agreed. She takes the opportunity to talk about the rumors that Chiampa had recommended Jang Ho to be the next commander of the demonic guard, and she asks what was going on over there. Seeing that she took the bait, the MC explains that the man was someone exceptional and loyal and opens up about him being one of his men. The one asks how he managed to convince Chiampa, and he says he took advantage of his pride, challenging him to make a choice for the good of the sect. However, she doesn't seem even slightly convinced. So Mudrik says it only worked because the old man didn't want to lose him. The information doesn't seem to surprise the Supreme, but she remains silent, which the young man breaks by bringing up one more little thing the Sword Demon had said, and he states he thinks he cares more about the good of the sect than any of the 8 Supremes, and that does make her scowl. He talks about the difficulty in making Jang Ho a commander, and even Wujin's advisor had made a suggestion, but it seemed impossible even to him. The Supreme interrupts him, asking what Myung had suggested, and Muk explains that the advisor thought it would be possible if another Supreme also recommended Jang, but none of them would do something like that. All of this makes the woman question him about why he was so sure of that. Keeping up the act, he pretends not to understand. Then she asks if he believed Chiampa was the only Supreme Demon who cared about the sect, which he denies. Seeing where the conversation is going, Yanring states that even so, he came to her house to stroke her ego and ask her to recommend Jang Ho. Well, just as he expected, she saw through his plan. He knew he should be honest when situations blended truth and tricks to the point that no one really knew what was going on. That was the most opportune moment to try to put his scheme into action. That's why the protagonist asks if the Supreme had noticed his plan. Realizing her silence, it becomes clear that she had her doubts. After all, Chiampa was crazy enough to abandon his own brother, so why would he choose him in the first place? Serious, the Supreme stares at him. When she finally speaks, she says she understood why the sect leader had appointed him as master of the Nirvana Pavilion. Now he was the one who was lost. The one approaches the boy to continue the conversation, and she says, "You have a strange way of shaking people's hearts." At last, she states that she will recommend Jang Ho for him. Not believing it, the boy asks if she was being serious in that moment, to which she responds that she wanted to show that the Sword Demon was not the only Supreme Demon who thought of the good of the sect. The matter ends with Muk bowing to her again with a promise not to forget her help. On the way back, he reflects on how he already expected the woman to help him, because if he had the potential to inherit the sect, and Chiampa realized that before she did, she wouldn't want the old man to have a monopoly over the boy. She wouldn't let him have anything if she could help it. She hated him so much that he was the first one she crushed with her own hands after becoming the sect leader in the past. At the Celestial Demon Palace, Wujin and Myung were discussing how they hadn't thought Muk would be able to persuade the Supreme of the Flowered Sword. But his father knew exactly what strategy had been used, and he preferred to focus on Jang Ho's character and loyalty. And Myung explains that he really was exceptional, but his strength lay in martial arts, not politics. Muzhik had made a very wise choice regarding him. His words lead Wujin to conclude that he had somewhat neglected the man because that was probably an emotional decision, just like Jang Ho himself, a trait the advisor considered both his strength and his weakness, unlike the Celestial Demon, who claims it to be a weakness. Then Myung asks how his master intended to resolve the situation of the commander of the demonic army. But since 2 Supreme Demons had recommended him, he had no choice but to accept the recommendations. He couldn't hurt both of their egos. Thus, it was decided that Jang Ho would be a leader, and Myung would be responsible for delivering the news. At the Nirvana Pavilion, Muk was facing his friend, who admitted he didn't know what to do to repay his kindness. But he states that, based on his personality, he doubted he'd be able to return the favor, which makes Jang Ho ask what the boy meant by that. So he explains that he appointed him as commander for 2 reasons. First, because he believed he was the perfect person for it. In other words, he was thinking about the good of the sect, not about the benefits the 2 of them could gain from it. Jang says he didn't deserve such praise. But his friend ignores him and says, and the second reason is because I have hope that the demonic army will become my strength. Not following Mook's reasoning, the new commander asks if the two reasons didn't contradict each other, which makes him comment on how difficult it would be to maintain a friendship with the man, since he was such an incorruptible person. But he assures that he would never use their personal relationship to try to force him to do anything. Surprisingly, Jang tells his friend that if he saw him as someone who would ruin relationships for the sake of the organization, he was completely wrong. And Mook questions him. The man asks if he remembers when they first met, when he sent an anonymous letter because someone had hurt his friend. He wanted revenge. So it was clear that he was an emotional person, someone who valued personal relationships more than anything in life. And he says, I want to swear loyalty to you. No, I already have. Know that I will be loyal to the sect and its leader, while also working hard with the demonic army. However, he wanted to make it clear that the person he would be most loyal to was Moojuk. Hearing that, the MC realizes he had someone much better by his side than he had thought. Smiling, he says he'll be counting on his friend from now on, and Jang replies, saying he's excited to work together. At night, as always, Chiyompa's appearance in the Nirvana Pavilion courtyard was punctual, and Mook comments on how his posture made him look like a guardian statue protecting him. On the defensive, he asks if Mook was trying to provoke him because he had a gloomy aura, which the boy promptly denies. The old man congratulates him for making Jang the commander, and the MC thanks him for the recognition. All this calmness was strange, as Mook had expected to see Chiyompa on edge for involving Yanrang in the situation. Even so, he couldn't afford to relax. Who knew what that old man might do? He asked how he managed to persuade the Supreme Demoness of the Flowered Sword. After making sure the guy wouldn't get mad at the answer, the boy explains his strategy of using words the old man had never said, which makes the old man grumble before saying he'd been tricked, because surely the woman had figured out Moojuk's trick. And he suggests she might have played a trick on him herself, offering help to prevent the two of them from working together. With that, the old man asks what he intends to do, and Moojuk confirms that Chiyompa would be his priority. But it's hard to believe after the help he received with Jang Ho, and the boy counters, stating that he only succeeded because Chiyompa had helped him before. Holding a small box, the mustached man says he finds it hard to believe Mook would stay by his side if the woman made an irresistible offer like the one she was about to make. The boy takes the object, asking what's inside, but the man simply says a promise is a promise. His eyes shine brighter than ever upon seeing the contents of the box. It was the celestial divine pill. For real, and he just handed it over that easily? He could have sworn he'd make up 1,000 excuses, like rambling about how hard it was to find good elixirs, or something like that. And Chiyompa explains that he'd had it for a long time, and not even he had the courage to swallow it. Suspicious, Mook asks if he was really giving it to him. Out of patience, the old man asks if he wants to give it back or what, stabbing his sword into the ground. He takes a sip of his drink before continuing the conversation with the second young master. And with sincerity, he says, I will be betting the rest of my life on you. The statement leaves Moojuk more startled than ever. The Blood Heaven demon had shown him the strongest card in his hand without hesitation. Previously, the boy told his father there was no reason to keep Chiyompa around. But with that gift in hand, he'd have to change what he had claimed. If the old man was that determined, he would do his best to keep him close. He bows to him, thanking him for the trust. However, when he asks him to stand guard while he consumes the pill, the old man jumps up and asks if he's crazy to want to swallow that thing in front of him. But since he was the one who gave it, it made sense to the boy to consume it in his presence. Allowing someone to guard you while you circulate energy carries great meaning. It's the final stage of trust a martial artist can have. That's why Chiyompa asks if Moojuk really trusts him with that. So without delay, he announces that he's going to swallow the pill. After all, if it were poisoned, he'd have to do whatever the other wanted to get the antidote. Which makes the demon ask what makes the boy believe he didn't poison it, but Mook didn't think he was that low. Still, he insists, asking what will happen if his instincts are wrong, to which the boy responds that he'll think about it when it happens. Finally, Moojuk places the celestial divine pill in his mouth, asking for it to melt easily. It runs through his blood and his entire body in a bright blue light, and the boy glows for a moment before opening his eyes. Thanks to the pill, his inner energy had increased by leaps and bounds. His moment is interrupted by Chiyompa, who asks what the divine pill tasted like, to which the boy replies, "It tastes like honey. I've never eaten anything so delicious before." And the old man starts blaming himself for not having eaten it instead of keeping it for so long. But Mook tells him not to blame himself because he was sure he digested it 10 times more efficiently than the old man ever would, which was true. His energy overflowed to the point that he was sure he'd never lose in a fight against him due to lack of energy. Chiyompa calls for his attention and asks what many had already asked when crossing his path. "Who the hell are you?" Adding on, asking who he was to stir his heart like that, to the point of making him hand over the celestial divine pill. Moojuk stares at him, but his pupils shrink and he is enveloped by a shimmering blue aura, which stuns the old man. Then he responds that he's someone who, inevitably, will command the old demon, if he lives long enough to see it happen. The two exchange suspicious glances, and Chiyompa crosses his arms, chilled by the aura emanating from the boy. He asks what his ultimate goal is, which confuses the mustached man. Even so, he reflects on the question. When he says he's already too old and just wants to keep living the way he has, he's asked if he wasn't forcing it with that answer. But he doesn't understand what's forced about his response. And the hero explains that when he was pressuring him, he acted like a much younger man. He swore he could feel the flames burning fiercely beside him. Hearing that, Chiampa makes sure he's being serious, which the MC confirms. And honestly, he feels happy hearing the comment. He thought he had grown soft in recent times, a feeling Mujik understood very well. No matter how many ambitions and passions he had, time would still rip them from his hands without a shred of mercy. The protagonist remains silent as he picks up one of the old man's cups, and extending the cup and the bottle toward him, he gently asks him to pour a little of the drink, a very unexpected request, which makes Chiampa comment that he lost the bet this time, not the other way around. But Muck explains that the moment he gave him the pill, he won the real bet. That's why he would now accept the liquor he had offered a long time ago. He didn't know if it was possible, but he intended to make Chiampa part of his group. So the old man poured a drink for the protagonist, who drank it all without hesitation, stating that they would work together from now on. Even if he tried something, as long as it was something Mujo could handle, he had his approval. The idea of trying something makes the crazy old man burst into laughter. Celebrating, the hero asks for another round, and so he does. He knew that, even though he was laughing hard, he still hadn't opened his heart. Chiampa wasn't someone easy to figure out with just details and small warm moments. Not even Mujik truly knew what was going on in his heart, and their relationship would only be established when the old man decided he could know. The possible endings would be to burn with flames, be struck with a sword, or to become his eternal friend. On the day he decided, everything would be decided. But he still wasn't good enough. The boy needed to accumulate more internal energy, something he could never have too much of. While training, he heard someone comment on how his internal energy had increased again. It was his father, standing at the door of the training room. The boy explains that he received the celestial divine pill from the demon of the blood heavens, and Wujin's silence is uncomfortable. So he asks why he wasn't surprised by the information, and the man explains that he already knew that's what he wanted from Chiampa. When he asks how he knew, the boy is shocked to discover that it was his father who gave the pill to the old man. So surprised that he repeats his words just to confirm what he heard. So the line Chiampa drew earlier was right. Wujin asks what he had offered in the bet, to which he replies that he had offered himself. The man concludes that Chiampa accepted a lost deal, but Mook states that he was only getting started and intended to take down all 8 supreme demons. Hearing that brings a deafening silence between the two. It was strange for Mujuk. Before, he would have said the boy was going crazy, but now he said nothing. So he questioned his father's silence. But he says he was thinking that maybe the hero was really capable of doing it, which makes him think that Wujin was finally seeing his worth. And the celestial demon says nothing more about it. He simply turns his back and tells him to continue his training. Before he leaves, he thanks him for making Jang Ho the commander of the demonic army. But the man cuts him off, stating that he only did it because 2 supreme demons recommended him. The boy says he will become happier, and that makes his father freeze. He believes he needs to be happy so that those around him can be happy too, and then the sect itself will become happier. Before Wujin can say it's a useless notion, the boy anticipates his words, that it's a useless emotion that will lead to his downfall. And his father says it's good to be aware that if he wants to walk that path, he should forget something trivial like happiness. However, Mudrik shouts that it's not his wish, and states that he will be happy, even on that path. The door is closed, leaving him alone. He was determined to make it happen. On another day, Yanrang observes the flowers in a huge garden. They are praised by someone who catches her attention, and she replies, talking about the saying that they become more beautiful over time. But it was a saying that would take a while to apply to the second young master, who stands watching her, and he thinks that if he were older than now, things would be much more complicated. The boy had come to thank the woman for her help, offering a liquor as a token. She thanks him but explains that she stopped drinking a long time ago, and the young man apologizes. In truth, he was well aware that she didn't drink, but brought the liquor so she wouldn't know that he was aware of many things about her. Sometimes he wondered if he had to do this kind of thing, but he knew he needed to do whatever he could to build a relationship with the woman. Mujik states that help must be rewarded, so he asks if there's anything he can do for her. After thinking for a moment, she replies that it would be better for him to cut ties with the demon of the bloodstained heavens, exactly as Chiampa had warned. Pretending not to understand, the young man asks why, and she explains that their principles were very different. The boy wanted to change the sect for the better, with rules and order, something the demon despised. After some silence, he apologizes for not being able to fulfill Yanrang's request. She asks why he couldn't. Mudrik explains that Chiampa had also gifted him something valuable. It wasn't his intention to say, but he had to be honest about what he had received, because he wanted to have both demons on his side. Upon hearing that, the woman questions what the gift was. Muck tries to keep it secret, stating it was personal, but she counters, asking if they weren't close enough for him to share. Then the boy says that for her great help last time, he would tell her. Upon revealing that he received the celestial divine pill, the demoness's face freezes. It was shocking to know that the greedy old man was capable of such a thing. But Mujik reaffirms what he said, adding that Chiampa decided he was more valuable than the pill. This leaves the woman speechless. The young man thanks her again, asking her to contact him if she ever needs help with anything, and says goodbye. Before he leaves, she asks what kind of person Chiampa seemed to be in the protagonist's eyes, and he says his temper was bad and violent, that he hated him at first, but the more time they spent together, the better he got. Yanrang questions whether he only thought that because of the gift he had received, something he doesn't deny, and she threatens, saying that if he wanted to keep receiving her help, he should cut the ties he had with the old man. Hearing that, Mook asks her to prove it, to prove that she could help him more than the demon of the bloodstained heavens. After all, he was the one who gave him the pill, so he needed a good reason to cut ties. And the woman suggests that her being good for the sect should be enough. And Muck rambles on about how he despises people who try to buy their subordinates with dreams, ideals, and loyalty. The statement infuriates Yanrang. Even so, he continues, saying he didn't know what she thought of the hero, but he was preparing for something grand. He would meet countless people, and he wasn't confident he would always make the right decision. So he wanted her to show him something that would help him make the right decision, something more precious than the celestial divine pill. She remained silent, wrapped in a cold aura. Chiampa was someone he had to have by his side. Now even the demoness of the blooming swords was undecided. When she finally relaxes, she asks what Mudrik wants, and thinking about it, there was nothing he needed at the moment. With that, she would interpret that with Chiampa, he didn't need anyone else. The boy says goodbye again, leaving with a smile on his face. Knowing that precisely because he hadn't said anything, the woman would become even more impatient. As usual, Mudrik meets Chiampa in the pavilion courtyard at night, and he asks what the hag told him this time. The boy explains that she asked them to cut ties, which the old man already knew, but asks if she gave a reason for it. Mook gives a summary, mentioning the part about their differing values, which was pure nonsense to the elder. He asks what the MC intends to do, and of course he intended to stay with whoever offered him more benefits, which enrages the man. But the boy asks if he wouldn't weigh his options when possible if he were in his place. What shuts Chiampa up, who knew he would act the same way? Even so, Mudrik assures him that he was still number one, as he doubted Yanrang could give him something better than the pill. However, it wasn't impossible for the demon, who claimed that the woman was someone capable of anything to destroy him. All that friction makes Mook question why their relationship was so complicated, and when thinking about the reason, the man seems to wither. Mudrik knew the reason, even though he had asked, but the old man deflects, saying he didn't need reasons to hate someone. The protagonist changes the subject, inviting him for a drink so he wouldn't return home sulking, and Chiampa asks what kind of person the young man thought he was, to which he replies, someone calm. I don't think that's a bad thing, Mook. When you're disappointed, you can stay that way, but when you're upset, you need to let it out. He calls him again and offers to pay for the drinks this time, which is enough to make him jump up, saying he'll wait for the boy in the demon village. At the Bar of Joy, people were fixated on the duo, while Mook is surprised as he thought the old man would want to visit a place with several experienced professionals, but he says he wasn't into that, which was impressive considering his brother loved it. Upon mentioning Qianyang, Chiampa asks not to speak of him to avoid ruining the mood. Mook agrees. He had mentioned him intentionally, to be sure the wound hadn't closed within him. The owner greets them, honored to receive them there. Upon praising the food and liquor of the place, Muck makes the guy very grateful. As soon as he walks away from the table, Chiampa comments that all that kindness was unnecessary. But the boy explains that a little kindness wouldn't bring any harm, something the old man strongly disagreed with. For example, if he threatened the owner saying he'd do horrible things to him if the food was bad, it would surely come out flawless. And he pointed to the boy's emotions as a disadvantage compared to his brother. Muck explains that life was easier when one is heartless, but he says he wouldn't live his own life that way and gets questioned. Then he says he believes food tastes better when the one who prepared it is happy rather than trembling in fear. But nothing softens the old man, who argues that one day they would take advantage of the boy, and if he didn't help the person, he'd be harshly criticized. Because to him, that's how humans were. However, to Muck, one day the same person could return his kindness, which could even save his life. To him, that's how humans were. But Chiampa was too stubborn and preferred to pay to see. With the food now on the table, Mook comments that he thinks the man is more emotional than him, which leads him to conclude the boy was terrible at judging people. However, he thought he was right. With each meeting, he was behaving more emotionally than usual. Even there, the man's emotions were involved as he shared his thoughts with someone, which was unprecedented. Taking advantage of the topic, Mudrik mentions that he should start managing his disciples better. Otherwise, they would keep causing trouble with the Nirvana Pavilion. The comment leaves the old man outraged, calling the boy arrogant, who throws the same adjective back at him. This only provokes more anger in the elder. But Mudrik states that he looked down on the sect and his father and imitates him, justifying the attitudes by being the demon of the bloodstained heavens, suggesting that he didn't care if his apprentices were trash. This provokes immense fury in Chiampa, causing the table to shatter. Everyone observes the fiery aura he was emanating in awe, and he yells that Mook had crossed the line of arrogance, and that he wanted to beat him to the end right then. Noticing the bar owner's stares, he asks what he was looking at and orders more liquor and food. But the MC interrupts him, saying that in these situations, he shouldn't act like that. He places some coins under the chair and apologizes to the owner, promising to compensate for other damages to the bar later that day. But the man says it was all right. Still, the master insists and kindly asks him to bring more food and drink. Seeing the friend's attitude, Chiampa asks if that was what he wanted him to do, and the boy explains that even if he wanted to, he shouldn't go around breaking things, which makes him ask if he was teaching a supreme demon how to be gentle, but he was just trying to align his demonic path. This seems to make the mustached man even angrier. It's something Mudrik ignores as he asks him to stop yelling and invites him to sit at another table. Even burning with hatred, he obeys, complaining, but he obeys, and calls the boy crazy, still threatening him with food and drinks if he ever betrays him. The server delivers the food quickly after hearing the two arguing. Mudrik asks if he was being serious, and the friend confirms. And in that case, he asks him to swear loyalty to him sincerely, and explains that the threat could be used in another way. If the MC swore loyalty to the demon and was betrayed, he would drive his sword right through his heart. He pours a shot for the old man and asks him to accept it. The two stare at each other before Mook extends the glass to Chiampa, who grumbles but drinks. Deep down, he already knew what would happen. Even without physically toasting, they had toasted in the old man's heart. Meanwhile, at the palace of the Demoness of the Flowering Sword, her informant tells her that the young master was drinking with Chiampa at that moment, and adds calling him arrogant. But he is scolded by her, as there was nothing worse than speaking about someone behind their back. He apologizes and says he'll keep that in mind. The woman comments that Mudrik was no longer the second young master she had known before, but the informant considered him a storm in a teacup. However, she suggests that that teacup might be big enough to carry the whole Murim. I mean, for that old man to have given the celestial divine pill to him, he must have seen potential as the sect's successor. Worried, the young man asks if she also saw that as a possibility. And Yanrang thinks that Mook definitely showed an unexpected side, but not to the point of seeming worthy of the pill he received. That was what stressed her the most, the fact that she missed something Chiampa noticed right away. Was there really something that old man could see and she couldn't? He interrupts the master's train of thought, asking her to rest, and says he has prepared a new man. So she does, while the boy stares at her as he leaves the garden. At another moment, Mudrik enters his father's training room, a place he had never entered before. An iron plaque catches his attention. It was 10,000-year cold iron and full of marks. It was impressive, but it made him wonder if it wasn't basically abuse of cold iron. Wujin tells him to be quiet and use the 4 steps of the wind god all at once, and he nods. The boy starts emanating his blue aura quickly. The 4 steps of the wind god have 4 main movements and more than 900 changes that can be made. Depending on how you interpret and use the changes, the movements vary and the powers of the 4 steps of the wind god are different. The boy lands on the ground after the sequence and notices his father's angry look, which makes him ask if he did something wrong. Wujin asks if he had already learned at that level. Maybe it's because he recognizes his abilities, so the two continue discussing martial arts after the question, and the man helps with some opinions, and surprisingly listens to his son's opinions and even accepts some, like when he suggested that putting more strength in the right foot would be the correct interpretation. Mudrik never expected to see his father acting so freely and rationally when it came to martial arts. He asks him to close his eyes and tell him what he learned that day, and he does. The protagonist seems immersed in martial arts, as if it had touched him deeply. That discussion with his father was what elevated his skills with the 4 steps of the wind god, and for that, he was grateful for the teachings. And he intended to repay him by taking down Olmuji, despite having said that the repayment would be an increased allowance in the future. But his father tells him to stop with the nonsense and eat something before leaving. The last part leaves him confused. However, Wujin doesn't understand why. So he explains that he had never heard the man invite anyone to eat with him before. All soft-hearted, he keeps up the tough act and says there's nothing to be surprised about. With the table set, Wujin says there's more food if that isn't enough. The two begin the meal in silence, and Muk thinks that his father must be finding it strange that he's so quiet. But what he doesn't know is that before the regression, he never even thought about eating with his father. Now that this moment has come, he finally understands. Deep in his heart, he had already wished to eat together with him. Wujin asks if he found the food tasty, and he jokes, asking if he'd like to trade cooks with him, which his father denies. He asks why Mudrik had come looking for him, and he reveals that he had a favor and ask. He wanted to have one more member in the family, and that makes the man ask if he meant he was planning to get married. But the boy denies it and explains that he would like to teach the rising sword art to his personal guard, Leon. This was essential to keep the position of Lord of the Underworld secure, but only blood members of the Celestial Demon could learn the technique. Wujin didn't understand how he could treat his own brother so badly and at the same time elevate a bodyguard to a blood relative. But Mook considered her more important than his brother, someone who would achieve incredible things. Even so, his father asks if he was sure about that, and he explains that his exclusive martial art would become the demonic art of the 9 calamities, something that could only be learned by his successor. Wujin had to admit if there's one thing his son had, it was confidence, so he accepts the request. How could he have agreed so easily? Before he gets too excited, the Celestial Dragon asks his son to promise him one thing. and he eagerly waits to hear what it is. Then the man says, "The next time you want to finish off one of the Supremes, I want you to tell me first, no matter which one it is." Mudrik agrees to the condition, assuring that he will tell him. At his pavilion, Muk waits for his friend, who soon arrives asking if he had called for her. He greets her as the leader of the Phantom Shadow Corps, and she bows to him. Then he announces that from that day on, he would teach her a new martial art. That surprises her. She can hardly believe what she heard. But the friend confirms it and reveals that he will teach her the rising sword art. His words shock her, and she says she couldn't do that, as it was something to be passed only to blood relatives of the celestial demon. Calmly, Muk asks if she was done with the sermon, to which she replies, "I have more to say, but I'll stop here. No, you can't teach me that. If a celestial demon finds out." Before she can finish, the boy informs her that he already got Wujin's permission, which leaves Leon bewildered, and she asks if he was serious. She found it strange because that was Mudrik's exclusive martial art, so he had no reason to teach it. The friend explains that she would have to learn at least one martial art of that level to be the leader of the Phantom Shadow Corps. Besides, she was basically a blood relative to him, so it wasn't a problem for her to learn it. Hearing those words left Leon moved. Even so, she questioned how she could learn the martial art of her former master. She lowers her head, asking herself over and over how. And trembling, she says that no one had ever treated her so well before. Close to the woman, who was on the verge of tears, Muk pats her and affirms that she had always been important to him, which makes her break down in tears, hugging Mudrik. After the emotional moment, Mudrik focused on Leon's training for a while, as well as managing the Nirvana Pavilion and of course his own training. His friend learned the rising sword art quickly, showing more talent than expected and progressing very fast. And the process also made him realize that teaching also involved learning. In his past life, he had never taught anyone, not even once. So this experience had become invaluable to the boy. At the Nirvana Pavilion, Muk comments that it had been a while since the last gathering of all the members there in the courtyard, which makes the entire squad nod. Muk liked the enthusiasm and announces that he was there to fuel the flaming spirits of the team, which leaves them confused by the comment. Then he asks Garyong to open a box that's beside him, and the contents take his friend by surprise. It was a pile of money, which makes him question what the purpose of all that was. Mudrik asks him to hand a bill to each member, and he questions it. But the master is firm and tells him to hurry. That was a special gift for everyone there, who were truly surprised by the amount. In unison, they thanked their leader for the gift. Then the MC explains that he was distributing the money so none of them would give in to bribes because there was no need. And he affirms that if they needed money, they could come to him to receive their monthly pay in advance. And if that still wasn't enough, he'd take it from his own pocket. Finally, he asks if they understood it clearly, which the squad confirms, being dismissed right after that. In the hallways, Daryong asks how Mudrik knew that Eiko needed money for his younger brother's wedding, and adds that the boys spent everything on their parents' medical expenses before they passed, and now gives to his younger siblings, so he lives with no money. But Mudrik plays dumb, which doesn't fool his old friend. Originally, he thought about giving the money only to Eiko, but it would be better to give it to all the members. The protagonist questions whether that was really important, and Daryong nods, stating that loyalty wasn't something that came out of nowhere. So the hero asks him not to be fooled, and says that it was just a trick to make himself look good. However, the young man refuses to believe that because even if those tricks weren't used, people would still take advantage of him. The comment is enough to leave the master speechless, but Daryong says goodbye before he can even think of anything. In Namdojong, Chiumpa asks what Mudrik was doing there, suggesting that something must have happened and now he was being arrested, and the boy asks if he had committed any crimes in the meantime. To which the demon replies that his life was full of sins all the time, but luckily for him, Muk says that this wasn't the time he'd be going to jail. So the old man wants to know the reason for the visit, and the boy hands a little red box to his friend, who wonders if some kind of poisonous gas would come out when he opened it, making Muk joke about where he could buy boxes like that because he liked a few. Even with Chiumpa insisting to know what was inside the item, Muk says he just had to open it to find out. Suspicious, he opens the little box carefully. It was a top-quality poisonous wine. Still, he was confused about why Mudrik had come to his house to deliver it, and the young man explains that it was a birthday gift. The information leaves the old man in disbelief, and the hero wishes him a happy birthday, confirming that it really was the day. However, not even Chiumpa knows how to answer that question. Seeing Muk's surprise, he explains that he stopped caring about birthdays a long time ago, and asks how he got that information. Mudrik asks who he thought he was, stating that the Nirvana Pavilion knew everything, even how many pairs of underwear the old man had. Testing him, Chiumpa asks how many there were. But the MC explains that he was exaggerating on that part, but that he truly wished him a happy birthday. Having done his part, he says goodbye to the mustached man. But before he leaves, the demon asks if the boy really came all the way there just to deliver a gift, which he confirms but asks him not to feel pressured, as it was from the heart. And the old man questions if the boy was really just leaving that quickly. But he was a very busy man, suggesting they go out that night to the Pungri Tavern. Chiumpa stares at the gift in disbelief even after his friend has left, Leaving the palace, Mudrik finds a surprise upon arriving at the courtyard. It's Yanrang inviting him for a drink before he goes. The two stare at each other intensely. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell, and see you next time on Tob's channel.